The Abysmal Flower, the title of this tragic romance novel our heroine became obsessed with. One of her friends from school recommended it. In the beginning, she could barely read a sentence, because the book's contents featured Sylvia, the protagonist, getting herself involved in kidnapping, incarceration, and erotic relationships. This was the ultimate X-rated romance novel. In the story, 5 families ruled the world. Sylvia, the female protagonist, was a part of Blue Pedalian. They were the arch enemies of Black Greece. She had mystical silver blue hair and golden eyes that shined as brightly as the sun. A lovely girl until tragedy struck. When the heir of the family, her only brother, who had faithfully been carrying out Pedalian family duties from an early age, went missing, locked up, taken to the dungeon, it was by none other than the head of the Black Greece, Lant, now our main character, Roxanna's forsaken godfather. In the evening, she went to the dungeon guard, asking for a key, her charms shimmering brightly against her lantern's light. The guard was flustered, trying his best to tell her he was ordered not to let anyone in, but he flinched with her, saying she never said anything about going in. She just wanted the keys. Bro simped out and pretty much handed them over. She tricked him, saying she changed her mind. She would be going in, not for long though, and told him her father didn't need to know about this. Making her way through the dungeon, she figured she was already off to a bad start. She needed to save the battered Cassius Pedalian, since he was her only means of survival. In the Agrees family, it was all about power and who was in control. Lantagrees, the patriarch of the family, had 10 wives and numerous children. During the monthly family banquet, only the 3 most accomplished offspring were permitted to join their father at the table. As a child, Roxanna never imagined herself there, but not since the incident. Her first memories of her mother Sierra were long flowing honey blonde locks, blue eyes with the depth of a vast lake, and a warm, gentle voice. Her father, on the other hand, was a different story. He barely stuck around long enough to name her before he disappeared. Roxanna, from a very young age, was struck by the name of her family, Agrees. They were into almost every vice known to man: theft, drugs, fraud, poison, murder, you name it. And no member of the family could escape that life path. The family's children were all indoctrinated, and Roxanna was no exception. She did not mind the studies, but the physical expertise was where she was found lacking. Her father did not spare her any mercy. As far as he was concerned, she was an object to be used. At a young age, he already started to prepare her for courtship. Her only friend and confidant was her big brother, Achilles Greece. He was 4 years older and a big softy, unlike the other members of the family. When Roxanna told him about their father's decision, he had asked if their mother was aware of this. Roxanna replied that she was, and wanted her to be a proud Agrees. He seemed uncomfortable, but encouraged her to listen to their mother. She had never noticed how his hand trembled as he patted her head. The weight of their family obligation was heavy on their shoulders, but they knew no other way until the incident. Whatever the special test was, Achilles never made it through. He died young, and now Roxanna was in the family dungeon, trying to release the son of their rival family, Cassius Pedalian. Observing his limp body dangling from the chains that suspended him against the wall, she guessed he must have been drugged. She pulled out a small bottle with clear liquid and dribbled the contents into his mouth. This seemed to revive him, because he suddenly lunged at her. He did not go far, because she clamped her hand over his mouth and shoved him against the wall. Then she whispered that he should be quiet and not spit out the liquid, because it was the antidote to whatever he'd been drugged with. Then she smiled quietly and said that whether he believed or not, she was here to save him by telling him to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Did you think I wasn't gonna do that? Of course I was, because here at My Shoujo Weekly, I'm covering manhwa stories in the shoujo genre. I even have a whole playlist you can watch once you finish this one. So come on, hit that subscribe, or I'm done making manhwa videos. As expected from someone who had just been kidnapped by his worst enemy, Cassius refused to be docile. He grunted and strained against his restraints. But Roxanna did not have the luxury of waiting for him to calm down. She needed to move quickly, so she struck him with a swift, precise blow. Cassius slumped forward, unconscious now. Waking up did little to improve his mood. He remained deeply distrustful of Roxanna. demanding to know who she was and why she was helping him. There was a strange hue to his eyes, as if his vision had been distorted. That had to be the explanation for his confusion. After all, they had met briefly when he had first been brought on the previous day. Roxanna paused for a moment before reaching forward and lifting his bloodstained shirt, just as she had suspected. Not drugs, sorcery. It wouldn't take long for the spell to wear off, 2 days at most. Then, she gripped his chin and forced him to face her. She told him she meant what she said earlier. She wanted him alive and would return the next day. With that, Roxanna turned and left before he could respond. The door slammed shut behind her. The next few days passed in a similar fashion. Roxanna arrived each day to check on his condition. Cassius, in turn, rebuffed every attempt she made to build trust. He refused the meals she brought him, even though they were far better than the prison slop he'd been given before. He even rejected the nutritional supplements she offered. Eventually, Roxanna decided to stop asking. She drove a solid fist into his midsection. When he struggled to catch his breath, she forced the dissolvable pill into his mouth. By the time he recovered enough to speak, his expression was still filled with suspicion. He asked why she was helping him. Roxanna ignored the question. So next, he asked for her name. Roxanna, she simply replied. A fitting name, he thought, for someone with eyes like rubies. Roxanna stood on the balcony of her room when a knock sounded at the door. Her maid Emily entered carrying a tray. On it sat a glass of water and a small white paper sachet. Emily informed her that the dosage had been increased to a fraction, considered lethal even for an expert. She also warned her to expect side effects: stomach pain, temporary paralysis, or coughing up blood. Members of the Agrease family developed immunity to poisons by ingesting them in gradually increasing amounts. Roxanna's immunity was already quite broad, but she had her own reasons for increasing the regimen. As Roxanna emptied the contents of the sachet into the glass of water, she asked about her brother. Emily replied that he was still in his room, though he would likely appear soon. As if summoned by the remark, a loud voice suddenly rang out, "Xana!" The door burst open, and a figure swept into the room with dramatic flair. Her dashing half-brother, Jeremy. At the beginning of the story, the heroine Sylvia was kidnapped by the Agrease family. While in captivity, she suffered a mental breakdown after learning of her older brother's death, and in that madness, wiped out the entire Agrease family. The mastermind behind the tragedy was none other than Jeremy. At the present time, Jeremy and Roxanna discussed her poisoned butterfly experiments, which were close to success. Jeremy voiced concern over her blood loss before the conversation turned to the new prisoner as they headed to the family banquet. During dinner, their father asked about their projects and praised their progress. Roxanna noted his good mood and asked if it had something to do with the prisoner. Lant commended her perception and confirmed it. The prisoner, he revealed, is the heir of the Bedelian family. Jeremy was visibly surprised, though Roxanna had already suspected as much. When Lant asked about her sudden interest in the captive, Roxanna explained that the Bedelian family's reputation for righteousness intrigued her. The thought of their upright heir, reduced to humiliation at her feet, filled her with a sense of triumph. Lant nodded pensively before bringing the dinner to a close. Outside the banquet hall, Jeremy asked whether she truly intended to handle the Bedelian heir herself. Roxanna confirmed that she did, though privately, she noted that Jeremy seemed more concerned about losing her attention. His possessiveness quietly amused her. Their younger sister, Charlotte, suddenly stormed in, furious. She insisted that she already had claimed the prisoner, and that Roxanna had no right to interfere. Roxanna calmly explained to her that their father settled the matter at dinner, but Charlotte refused to back off. Losing patience, Roxanna pulled the long hairpins from her hair and attacked. Within moments, Charlotte was left trembling on the floor in a bloodied heap, though the hatred in her eyes remained undiminished. Jeremy merely shook his head, as if wondering why she continued to challenge Roxanna. As Roxanna walked away, her pulse barely raised, Jeremy offered to deal with Charlotte himself. He hauled her up by the hair and coldly told her that if she needed to vent her anger, she should save it for the prisoner. Then he leaned closer and whispered the captive's identity, Cassius Bedelian, the heir of the Bedelian family, adding suggestively that she shouldn't try to destroy the prisoner simply because she could not have him. Charlotte's eyes widened at the revelation, before a slow, sinister smile spread across her face. In the greenhouse, Roxanna prepared to feed her newly hatched poisonous butterfly. The demonic species was nearly impossible to find, and just as difficult to raise. The toxic plants surrounding the greenhouse created a hostile environment that helped the creature survive. Yet, even then, the survival rate remained only 30%. Feeding the butterfly its master's blood created a bond between them, making it easier to control. To strengthen the creature further, Roxanna also had to increase her own poison intake. She sliced a small cut into her wrist and let the blood drip down, hoping it would make her pet grow stronger and faster. In a book she had once read about demonic creatures, there was a figure known as the White Tamer, the first person to discover the poisonous butterfly egg. He was said to possess the power to tame countless monstrous beings. Roxanna knew she was nowhere near that power, but still, there was no harm in trying. The more tricks she had at her disposal, the higher her chances of survival. Her thoughts drifted to her older brother, Dion, who had been conspicuously absent from the family banquet. Their father had likely sent him on an errand, yet the thought left her with an inexplicable sense of dread. Later that day, Roxanna received news that a dungeon guard had been found unconscious. The culprit was almost certainly Charlotte, likely encouraged by Jeremy. Apparently, Charlotte had even managed to break the supposedly unbreakable shackles by accident. Scarlet scoffed at the report. More likely, Cassius had loosened the restraints himself and tricked Charlotte into finishing the job. The thought impressed her. At that moment, her mother, Sierra, entered the room. It had been some time since they had spoken, so Roxanna asked what brought her here. Sierra explained that she heard Roxanna had come in second place. Then she froze. "Xana, you're bleeding." She had noticed the dark stain spreading across Roxanna's sleeve. Roxanna quickly hid her arm behind her back, brushing aside the concern and prompting her mother to continue. After a brief hesitation, Sierra simply said she was proud of her. "You are a true Agrease." "Thank you," Roxanna replied coldly, "just as you always wanted." Then she added if that was all, she was tired and intended to rest. Sierra flinched at the dismissal. After a quiet apology for intruding, she told Roxanna to take care of herself and left the room. The door closed with a firm clack. Roxanna immediately ordered Emily to prepare tea with an extra dose of poison. "A true Agrease," she muttered. She did not entirely blame her mother for Achilles' death, but their relationship had never recovered from it. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Cassius was being beaten. The guard clearly wanted to do worse, but held back, knowing the prisoner was supposedly under Lady Roxanna's supervision. Cassius recalled that the vicious girl who had visited earlier seemed to bear a grudge against Roxanna as well. Still, during her outburst, he had learned something useful. He had figured out how the restraints worked. The more the captive resisted, the tighter the shackles became. But if he remained calm, the chains loosened and became almost useless. For now, he kept that discovery to himself. He would reveal it only when the moment to escape finally came. As the name Roxanna Agrease echoed in his thoughts, Cassius wondered whether trusting her was truly possible. Not long after, Cassius received another set of visitors. This time, the head of the Agrease family himself, Lant, arrived with Roxanna at his side. Lant explained that he had chosen Cassius instead of his sister because he would last longer under torture. After receiving several brutal kicks and stomps, he finally stepped back and handed the chains to Roxanna as a birthday present. Roxanna thanked him graciously and promised to make a model prisoner out of the Pedalian heir. Once her father left, she grimaced at the sight of Cassius's battered body. Playing with a prisoner in such a condition was distasteful. She ordered the guards to take him away and clean him up. Privately, however, she pondered her father's gesture. He had never acknowledged her birthday before. What was he planning? As the guards dragged Cassius away, one of them muttered that he did not understand why this prisoner was receiving so much attention. The other quickly hushed him. Asking too many questions would only bring trouble. Still, he remarked that this was the first time Lady Roxanna had shown interest in a prisoner. If anyone else in the family had claimed him, Cassius's organs would already have been fed to the dogs. Meanwhile, Cassius struggled to decide which version of Roxanna to believe. The one who had promised to help him, or the one who had vowed to make her father proud. As they passed down the corridor, Sierra stopped them. Seeing the slumped figure between the guards, she asked who he was and whether or not he was dead. The men quickly reassured her that the prisoner was only unconscious. He was simply Roxanna's new toy. She gasped in horror. Sensing her distress, the guards hurried to explain that his battered state was not Roxanna's doing, but Lance. Sierra rushed forward and gently lifted Cassius's head. "Achilles," she called him. Cassius nearly flinched at the touch, barely managing to maintain the appearance of unconscious. The guards quickly urged her to step away before she contaminated herself. Then they dragged the prisoner onward. They exchanged uneasy glances as they walked. Sierra had called the prisoner by her late son's name. Achille had been about Cassis's age when he died. Perhaps that explained Roxanna's interest. Cassis resembled him too closely. Achilles' body had been in a similar condition that day. When they reached the cell, the guards dropped Cassis on the floor. One of them complained about the trouble of treating a man who was nearly dead anyway. Their footsteps eventually faded down the corridor. Only then did Cassis sit up. He silently reviewed the information he gathered. Lanta Greece had more than 10 wives. The woman earlier must have been Roxanna's mother, the 4th wife, and Achille, Roxanna's dead older brother. Was that why she wanted to help him? Footsteps suddenly approached. Cassis immediately collapsed back into his previous position, feigning unconsciousness. Roxanna entered with a quiet sigh as she inspected his wounds. The guards had done almost nothing besides removing his shackles. She untied the gag around his mouth and began applying ointment to the bruises, hoping it wouldn't sting too much. It didn't sting, Cassis thought. It tickled. Then she sat beside him and gently lifted his head onto her lap. He wondered if it was time to stop pretending. I wouldn't. Roxanna began absent-mindedly patting his head. She spoke softly, saying she didn't want to die yet, and she doubted he did either. She noted that he did not smell, and wondered aloud if someone had already given him a bath. Leaning closer, she murmured that his hair was surprisingly soft, and asked quietly if he was awake. Cassis tensed, ready to make his move, but her next words stopped him. She apologized for not protecting him earlier. She needed to deceive her father. Still, he need not worry anymore. Cassis belonged to her now. No one would touch him without her permission. She admitted it was foolish to speak this way to someone who was unconscious. Even so, she hoped he would recover soon and be able to return home safely. In truth, she already knew he was awake, but she chose to play along. After a moment, she said goodbye and left him where he lay. Only then did Cassis sit up again, scratching his head in confusion and wondering. The next day, when Roxanna returned, Cassis had been moved into a different room. A proper bed with clean linen stood in one corner. They exchanged brief glances as Roxanna set the tray of food on the table and lit the lamp in the otherwise dark chamber. Cassis remarked that she could have sent a maid instead. Roxanna replied that she already sent them to fetch new clothes for him. If she had sent a maid to give him food, he would likely have overpowered her and escaped. Turning back to him, Roxanna added that he should let her know if he needed more painkillers. When their eyes met, Cassis quickly looked away. The memory of her applying ointment to his body seemed to have left him slightly embarrassed, but his expression soon hardened. Now that he'd become her toy, he asked, what exactly did she intend to do with him? Roxanna sighed. She simply wanted him to eat, sleep, and recover as quickly as possible. Then, she added if he had no further questions, he should start his meal. It was not poisoned. With that, she left. When Roxanna returned with new clothes, Cassis was standing in the center of the room, tearing away the last tattered remains of his shirt. She stopped short. She had seen him bare-chested before, so why did the sight affect her now? Hearing her enter, Cassis turned and stated that he needed a shower. Roxanna pointed toward a door in the corner. The bathroom was through there. She had chosen the room specifically to give him some privacy. He raised his shackled wrists, pointing out that he could hardly change with these still on. Roxanna considered it for a moment. Then, she suggested a collar instead. He glared as she stepped closer and rose onto her toes to fasten it around his neck. It was not ideal, but still better than chains. Their faces were suddenly very close. Cassis turned his head away. He was more stubborn than she expected. Things would be easier if he reacted to her beauty the way the others did. But judging from his expression, that would not be the case. Roxanna calmly explained that the mansion was essentially a maze. Finding the exit would be nearly impossible. Unless he wanted to be killed by one of her siblings, it would be wiser for him to remain in this room. Then, she added, almost casually, that she did happen to know a shortcut that led directly outside. Cassis's eyes widened slightly. Roxanna smiled faintly and told him to go ahead and clean. While he was in the bathroom, she released one of her butterflies and watched it drift through the room. Now she would be alerted immediately if anything happened there. She wished she could keep watch herself, but caution was necessary. Besides, she had yet to receive any information from the butterfly she'd sent to the western border. She expected the Pedelian family to be searching that region for Cassis. Perhaps it was time to send another. The bathroom door opened. Cassis stepped out, freshly washed. Roxanna glanced at him and remarked that he looked much better now. Then, she patted the space beside her on the bed and asked him to sit. Cassis replied that he could treat his wounds himself. Roxanna asked about the ones on his back. Then, she added that he need not worry. She'd been doing this since childhood and was quite good at it. Since childhood? Cassis questioned. Roxanna explained that she'd always been the one to tend to her older brother whenever he was injured. Cassius hesitated before finally sitting down. He removed his shirt, revealing the web of scars crossing his skin. "Just the back," he said. "Beautiful," Roxanna thought. As she applied the ointment, she told Cassius to speak if the treatment hurt. Her hands moved in circles across his back, careful but steady. Everything about him seemed striking to her, and she felt quietly satisfied that Charlotte had not been allowed to claim him. When he flinched, she immediately apologized and adjusted her touch. A moment later, Cassius caught her wrist and stopped her. He had enough and insisted on tending to the rest himself. Roxanna wondered if he was simply unused to being cared for by a woman, or if she was just imagining it. Still, his hostility had eased slightly. Earlier, he had refused outright to let her treat his wounds at all. Whatever had changed his mind, she intended to keep building that fragile trust. Before leaving, she informed him that a physician would visit the following morning, and on it went daily. She would always bring his food and check his bruises. On her next visit, she brought lunch. Cassius seemed surprised that she continued to come in person. Roxanna explained that she wanted to make sure he did not skip meals. Partway through the visit, a wave of heat struck her. Her vision swam, and she suddenly coughed up blood. The tray slipped from her hands as she staggered, but Cassius moved quickly and caught her before she fell. The poison Emily had given her the previous day must finally be taking effect. She had felt unwell since then. Roxanna brushed the incident aside as nothing serious, apologizing for spoiling his appetite while wiping the blood from her mouth. Cassius reacted with clear disbelief, questioning how she could dismiss something so alarming. Roxanna responded with casual indifference, explaining that it was neither the first time nor likely the last. When she teasingly asked whether he was worried about her, he initially rejected the idea, before admitting that anyone would react the same if someone coughed up blood right in front of them. Roxanna paused. Perhaps he was right. She had simply grown accustomed to things others found disturbing. She reflected privately on the contradiction in him. Cassius showed defiance towards those with power, yet instinctively displayed empathy towards anyone he perceived as vulnerable. Admitting that she expected him to hate her, she remarked that his concern was surprising. A thought occurred. Perhaps showing him a gentler side would help deepen the trust she sought. After apologizing again for startling him, she took her leave. Jeremy appeared in the corridor just as she stepped out. The moment he saw the blood staining her dress, his expression changed in alarm. Roxanna dismissed the matter casually, claiming that her troublesome prisoner had required punishment. Jeremy's concern eased somewhat, though he warned her that wiping the blood only spread the stain. With mild annoyance, she complained about the thought of the prisoner's filthy blood on her, and said she would deal with it once she reached her room. Jeremy explained that he had come looking for her after failing to find her elsewhere. As he drew closer, he caught a faint scent in the air and realized she'd been in the greenhouse again. Even through the faint trace, he could still smell the poison on her. Roxanna slowed to a stop. If Jeremy could detect it so easily, there must still be poisonous residue clinging to her skin. From now on, she would have to avoid visiting the greenhouse before seeing Cassius. She had no intention of letting the toxins affect him. Jeremy hesitated before awkwardly suggesting she get rid of the poisonous butterfly egg, perhaps give it to someone else. Once it hatched, it would require regular feeding from her own blood. Roxanna's expression cooled instantly. She warned him not to interfere in her affairs again, unless he wanted to test the limits of her patience. Jeremy quickly backtracked, stammering that he was only worried about her. Many people died attempting to do what she was doing, and his concern was not misplaced. Those who controlled the butterflies often became their hosts. Even if she succeeded in taming one, she could not sustain it indefinitely. Eventually, the creature would consume her. Jeremy's worry was genuine. Roxanna sighed and said that he was the only one who truly cared about her well-being. She reached out to ruffle his hair, but stopped when she noticed the blood still staining her hand. Jeremy dismissed the concern, saying he could wash it later. Then, without thinking, he mentioned his relief that at least 2 of the eggs had died before hatching. The moment he realized what he had said, he immediately tried to apologize, explaining that raising several at once would have been dangerous anyway, and that he meant no harm. Roxanna simply reassured him and gently patted his head before suggesting they return. There was something Jeremy did not know. 1 egg had already hatched. Poison butterflies are demonic creatures, completely different from any other species. Their nature is subject to change, depending on the variety and strength of the poison that they're fed. Fortunately for Roxanna, these butterflies seemed to be content feeding on her blood. She was glad that all the time she spent ingesting all that poison was not for nothing. There were only a handful of them now, but in time, there would be hundreds more. Then, she would have an army of them, so no one could know that she had already hatched one of the eggs. Not Jeremy, her mother, or Emily, her personal assistant. at least not until she could help Cassis escape. The western border was the furthest she'd ever sent the butterflies. It seemed the distance was weakening the bond between them. She could not call them back. Bonding with multiple butterflies was harder than she thought. She was already pushing herself past her limit. Still, she had to increase her dose of poison even more to strengthen her connection with the butterflies. On a walk in the garden, Roxanna suddenly heard her name and turned. Maria, her father's third wife and mother to Dion, was coming down the path. Maria brightly complimented Roxanna, saying her beauty rivaled that of Sierra, whom she considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. Of all the people she would prefer to have an encounter with, Maria ranked near the lowest. Still, Roxanna graciously smiled and accepted her compliments. Maria invited Roxanna to have tea with her and asked one of the maids to go and fetch Dion. The maid replied that Dion was still away on an assignment, as ordered by Lant. Maria, in a deceptively gracious tone, asked the maid her name. She recalled this maid was the one referred by Luell and thanked her for the update. Then added that she did not recall giving her permission to speak. Before another word could be uttered, Maria swung her parasol, which disguised a deadly sharp blade at its point, and the maid's head was cleanly removed from her body. Oh my god, this family is crazy. Red landed in gruesome spatters over Maria's dress, and even her face. Then, she calmly directed the other two maids to feed the dead bodies to the monsters. She turned and worriedly asked if Roxanna had gotten any stains on her, but she didn't. At that, she excitedly moved back to the subject of tea, but Roxanna cut in. Roxanna apologized, saying she had other matters to tend to. Maria said it was too bad, but still gaily invited her to come visit her in her room anytime, because she had just bought a new set of wardrobes for her dolls, and Roxanna could have some too. Roxanna thanked her, then bowed and briskly hurried off. She had no intention of ever accepting that invitation voluntarily. Meanwhile, down in the dungeons, Jeremy was busy with his own set of torture training sets with the beasts. Seeing the maids with the body they were to dispose of, he suggested they use a different chamber from the one he was using. They maintained they were strong enough to withstand the mayhem. Learning they were Maria's servants, he figured they were as capable as they claimed. Maria was known to handpick only the most hardened women to serve her. However, barely 2 minutes later, the maids stumbled out of the chamber with traumatized expressions, hardly able to string their sentences together. Jeremy chuckled and reminded that he had warned them, ordering them to leave at once. They hurried away, casting wary, fearful glances at him. A few moments later, Jeremy strolled out to the garden to find Maria still there in her stained gown. He greeted her amicably, then commented in disgust at her gruesome habit of ending her maids at the slightest perceived provocation. She only grinned at him. Unbothered by Jeremy's obvious disgust at her stained clothes, Maria simply giggled and remarked that he looked cute. She asked if he'd been training in the monster hutch again, and reminded him not to overwork herself. Roxanna, it seemed, had been just as busy lately. Maria then complaining about how Roxanna had declined her invitation to tea with Dion. But Jeremy abruptly cut her off. With usual sharpness, he warned her to keep Dion away from Roxanna. Maria blinked in surprise. Surely it would be good for the siblings to spend time together once in a while. Or was Jeremy simply upset that he had not been invited? Jeremy's temper flared. As far as he was concerned, Roxanna only had one brother now, him. Maria needed to remember that. Roxanna barely had time for him anymore, ever since she acquired that toy of hers, Cassis. Maria struggled to follow his outrage. Roxanna had simply received a birthday gift from their father, a troublemaker. Did Maria truly have no idea what happened in this house? Jeremy demanded irritably. Then again, it was hardly surprising when she spent all her time playing with those creepy dolls. So Roxanna had obtained a new toy. Maria wondered what he was like. Jeremy dismissed him as someone just as irritating as Dion. Maria asked for someone to fetch Luell, wondering why no one had told her about this new development. Perhaps she would just visit Luell herself. She invited Jeremy to her room and promised him treats, but he rejected the offer, muttering that he was not one of her dolls. Unfazed, Maria happily declared that Roxanna simply had to visit her for tea, with the new toy included. She was already looking forward to it. Elsewhere, Roxanna walked up the mansion's front steps. Someone called out behind her. She turned to see Yoan, the guard who had previously overseen Cassis's cell, hurrying towards her. Roxanna hoped Charlotte had not been too brutal during their last encounter. Yoan flushed with surprise when she greeted him by name, clearly touched that she remembered. He presented a small bouquet he had picked himself. Roxanna accepted the flowers with a warm smile and thanked him. When she entered Cassis's room, the flowers caught his attention. as did her unusually pleasant mood. She explained that she had received them on her way over. Though beautiful, she added, they would not last long, and she offered them to him instead. Cassis seemed puzzled. If they were a gift, why give them away? Roxanna suggested they might brighten the room after his long confinement, but Cassis suddenly stiffened and asked who had given them to her. One of the guards, she replied, eyeing him quizzically. The flowers were a poisonous strain cultivated by the Agrease family, still experimental and not yet named. They'd been designed to induce paralysis. However, they only caused mild tingling in the hands and feet, hardly worth the effort, which was why the project had been largely abandoned. Not many people knew about them. Roxanna found it curious that Cassis did. He asked whether she frequently received such gifts. She answered that it happened occasionally, though he was under no obligation to accept them. After a moment, he simply told her to leave them on the table. The room, he said, could use some decoration. Roxanna then slipped a hand into her bodice. Cassis immediately turned his gaze away, clearly suspicious of what she intended. Amused, Roxanna withdrew a folded sheet of paper and asked where she was supposed to hide it. It was a map of the mansion. She told them to study it carefully and memorize the layout. She would have to burn it before leaving the room. Roxanna knew he still distrusted her. When the time was right, she intended to guide him through the mansion herself so he could decide whether to believe her. For now, she pointed to their current location on the map and traced the shortest route to the exit. The path was a hidden shortcut she had discovered by accident and believed no one else knew about. There was one small complication with using it, but it remained his best chance of escaping the mansion. After confirming he had memorized it all, Roxanna set the map alight. When she departed, Cassis turned to stare at the flowers contemplatively. The flowers were poisonous, but Roxanna had seemed unaware. He wasn't exactly sure how harmful they were to the human body, but he could recognize the telltale poisonous scent. It was a gift from one of her father's men. Could Lant possibly be behind this? And if so, why a poison bouquet? Could it be connected to the faint, toxic aroma constantly enveloping her? Would that also explain her spit up of blood? He picked up the flowers, and after a moment, a faint glow started to pulsate from his hand. His powers were not as strong with the shackles he wore, but slowly, the flowers started to disintegrate. Finally, with the flicker of his fingers, they were gone. In his study, Roxanna sat across from Lant as he asked how the retraining of her new toy was progressing. She replied that Cassis improved each day and meant a great deal to her. After all, her father had personally given him to her. Once the broken pieces were properly fixed, she added, she was certain she would enjoy him very much. Lant pompously observed that she was beginning to resemble him more and more. She had changed greatly since childhood. Roxanna kept her expression calm, though inwardly, she found the remark absurd. Lant then tried to recall the name of her dead brother. Asher, was it? With a dismissive scoff, he remarked that the boy had been a disappointment. He had once held high expectations for him because he resembled Sierra, but the child had proved utterly useless. Perhaps, Lant mused, the boy had been a bad influence on Roxanna while he was still alive. Roxanna's hands tightened into fists within the folds of her dress. If he meant the brother who died during a test years ago, she replied evenly that his name had been Achille, not Asher, though that hardly mattered. He had died dishonorably, after all, and meant nothing to her now. Even if he had lived, she would still become the person she was today, a proud Agrease who looked up to no one but her father. She finished the declaration with a graceful curtsy. Back in her room, Roxanna dismissed Emily before collapsing onto the settee with a weary sigh. It was hardly surprising she felt drained. Dealing with both Lant and Maria on the same day would exhaust anyone. She briefly considered taking a nap, though she doubted she would have the chance. At that moment, one of her butterflies drifted through the open window. She closed her eyes, focusing on the images it carried. A blood-red moon hung above a silent forest. Crows circled overhead, their cries echoing across a field of slaughtered bodies. At the center of it all stood a dark-haired man. Roxanna jolted upright. Dion, Lant's favorite son, the undefeated first-place holder at the family banquets, and easily the most vicious of her siblings. Judging by the distance from the western border and the butterfly's recent arrival, he could not be far behind. Roxanna slammed her fist against the wall. He was always one step ahead. Had Lant ordered him to eliminate the men at the border, the corpses the butterfly saw were likely men sent by the Pedelian family in search of Cassis. Could this day get any worse? She needed to warn him. Roxanna headed to his cell, but on getting there, slowed as she met his eyes. Perhaps not yet. The Pedelians would not abandon their search so easily. For now, She would strengthen surveillance along the borders and wait for another opportunity. Standing there in the room, she simply told Cassis to recover quickly. Silently, she added the truth. He was her only hope. The next day, Roxanna was returning from feeding the butterfly egg when rain suddenly began to fall. She found it strange that she was still on her way to see Cassis, despite being drenched. It wasn't even the time of day she usually visited him. Ever since learning about Dion, her thoughts had been unsettled. Perhaps she should return to her room instead. Turning to leave, she nearly walked straight into a solid wall of muscle. Dion greeted her with short words, his hand already gripping her bandaged arm. As he asked why she was injured, his gaze flicked to the wound, wondering if it was related to the poisoned butterflies. Roxanna asked when he had returned. She thought he was still away on his mission. He replied that he only just arrived. His attention lingered on her arm, as he remarked that he had believed the last egg had yet to hatch. Roxanna pulled her arm free and told him to let go. Dion then mentioned hearing that Cassis Pedillion had become her new toy. She responded coolly that news traveled quickly. He had never cared about household matters before. Dion replied that it only caught his attention because it involved her. She dismissed the remark as foolish and walked away. Meanwhile, Cassis was exercising in his room. His strength was slowly returning, and as long as he remained careful with his wounds, recovery would not take long. Soon, he'd be able to finally escape. The door opened, and Roxanna stepped inside, clearly distracted. Her thoughts still circled around Dion. She'd never been able to read him. Cold and emotionless, he rarely reacted to anything. It often felt as though nothing in the world could stir him. She wondered if he was still standing somewhere in the hallway. She couldn't hear him, but what if he was waiting silently for her to come back out? The thought made her heart pound. Her name suddenly cut through the noise of her thoughts. Roxanna looked up. Cassis was standing close to her, one hand raised as if he meant to reach out, but could not. The chain attached to his collar kept him just out of reach. She hadn't even noticed him approach. Leaning back against the wall, she sighed. Without realizing it, she had come here automatically. Her thoughts were clearly unsettled after running into Dion. Cassis pointed out she should deal with the bleeding first. Roxanna blinked before remembering her arm. Blood had begun seeping through the bandages. The wound must have reopened when Dion grabbed her earlier. Cassis suggested finding something to clean it. For a moment, Roxanna considered returning to her room as she had originally planned. Yet, the thought of stepping back into the hallway, where Dion might still be waiting, made her hesitate. Cassis suggested she sit down. She was losing too much blood to keep standing like that. Roxanna tried to brush the suggestion aside, but he repeated it more firmly. After a short pause, she thanked him and sat. Cassis glanced at her briefly before looking away again. Roxanna shifted uncomfortably, wondering if she had done something wrong. A moment later, he tossed her a robe and told her to cover herself. She looked down at herself, then back at him before thanking him quietly. Her clothes were hardly revealing, yet Cassis seemed distinctly flustered. He was even blushing. The sight made her think he looked rather cute. After examining the wound, Cassis remarked that her bandaging was poorly done. He thought she claimed to be experienced. Roxanna replied that she normally handled such things well, and the bandage must have come loose this time. Cassis sighed and offered to help. She stared at his outstretched hand, surprised by how cooperative he was being today. As he carefully rewrapped the wound, he observed the cut resembled one made by a blade. Roxanna silently scolded herself for not concealing it better. Watching him work, she noticed how different his attitude had become. He was clearly lowering his guard around her. It was well known that he cherished his family. In the book, it was mentioned often that he was especially close to his sister Sylvia. Perhaps that was the reason for the change. Perhaps Roxanna reminded him of her. A small smile appeared on her lips. At last, she had discovered his weakness. Roxanna said she needed Cassis's help, her voice soft as she began undoing the buttons of his shirt. The room had been quiet for too long, she remarked lightly. The faint sound of silk brushing against skin seemed unusually loud as she slid the garment from his shoulders. Since neither of them truly trusted each other, she continued, perhaps they should establish some kind of safe word between them. With a gentle push, she guided him backward until he was reclining against the bed. She told him she was about to do something and leaned close enough for her breath to brush his ear. In a quiet whisper, she asked him not to be angry afterward and not to hate her for it. Cassis swallowed, but kept his eyes fixed on her. Then, Roxanna pressed a kiss to his neck. He immediately grabbed her arm to stop her, demanding sharply to know what she was doing. Even now, he was trying to behave like a gentleman, Roxanna thought with faint amusement. She probably should have expected that from him. She apologized softly and touched his cheek, asking him to relax, even if it became uncomfortable. She would make it quick. Leaning down again, She brushed her lips against his skin. Cassius flinched and tried to protest once more. His fists tightened, as though restraining himself from pushing her away. Roxanna murmured that he would not have to lift a finger. Her touch moved slowly, light kisses and gentle caresses trailing across his cheek, chest, and eventually abdomen. When she finished, she thanked him for cooperating. Cassius's skin was flush and damp with sweat, and he could barely meet her gaze. Roxanna smiled to herself. That should be enough for now. The next day, Roxanna was passing through the garden when she spotted Lant and Dion speaking together. From a distance, they seemed almost alike, standing close, with their heads inclined towards one another. Lant eventually clapped Dion on the shoulder, and Dion's eyes briefly shifted towards Roxanna. She immediately turned down another path. 5 years earlier, Achilles had been killed after failing to eliminate his assigned target. During his test, Dion had been the one to finish the task. That alone was enough for Roxanna to dislike him. The other reason was simpler. Dion was probably the only person who had ever seen her weak. During her own test, the hallucinatory poison had made her believe the target before her was Achilles. She'd been unable to strike, and had sworn she would never allow her brother to die again at someone like Dion's hands. Dion had watched the entire scene unfold, and had simply remarked that she should not attempt if she could not go through with it. Roxanna shouted at him to leave. He wasn't supposed to be here in the first place. Sometimes, she wondered who Achilles had seen in his own hallucination, the vision that had made him fail. Back in her room, Emily presented an invitation for Maria. Roxanna expected it. Not long ago, Jeremy had come to apologize after accidentally mentioning Cassius Pedelian to Maria. Sure enough, the invitation asked Roxanna to attend with her favorite toy. Roxanna had no intention of bringing Cassius. The tea party was scheduled for the following day. It would only be the second time she had attended one of Maria's gatherings. She could only hope nothing unpleasant happened. The next morning, Roxanna made her way to Maria's quarters. As soon as she arrived, Maria greeted her cheerfully and invited her to sit down. Across the room, Sierra turned towards her with a startled expression. Sierra's anxious expression made it clear she had not known Roxanna would be attending the tea party. Roxanna herself had been equally surprised, though she concealed it behind a pleasant smile as she took her seat. Maria's giggle carried a sharp, unsettling delight as she admitted the surprise had been intentional. Otherwise, it would not have been nearly as entertaining. Watching them, Roxanna was reminded of a snake and a mouse. Maria held the room, while Sierra shrank beneath her presence. Sierra had always been intimidated by her, and had never possessed the courage to refuse. In truth, nothing about this family could be called normal. A father who forced his children to kill one another, a son who obeyed and slaughtered his half-brother, and here sat a wife who dragged her co-wife into humiliating situations for amusement. Maria pouted, lamenting that Roxanna had not brought her new toy. She had only glimpsed him briefly, but already considered him the most attractive one yet. It was such a shame, since she had even prepared a special bird cage for him. Roxanna merely smiled and apologized, explaining that he was shy and might even bite if brought before strangers. Maria wondered aloud whether Roxanna had tried drugging him. Roxanna replied that she had considered it, though making him too docile might quickly grow boring. If that happened, she might lose interest and dispose of him entirely. She would rather not throw away her first toy so soon. The surrounding ladies joined the conversation, debating the merits of obedient versus rebellious human pets. After some time, Maria clapped for attention, announcing that she wished to present the newest addition to her collection. At her command, Luelle appeared. Roxanna had already expected something grotesque, and she was not disappointed. The woman who stepped forward was bound with chains and moved with awkward, halting steps. Her mouth had been sliced wider than nature intended, and crudely stitched into a permanent smile. One eye was hidden beneath a patch that barely concealed the scarred burn stretching from her forehead down across the socket. Oh my god. I thought Maria was crazy from the earlier interaction, but this caught me off guard when it really shouldn't have. Maria turned towards Sierra with a cruel sweetness, asking whether this doll was not cuter than the last one. Sierra could barely look at the figure before her. She trembled in her chair as tears gathered in her eyes, weakly agreeing. Maria laughed in delight and instructed Luelle to pour Sierra a cup of tea. The chained woman shuffled forward, the metal links clinking with each step. But Sierra's hands trembled so violently that the tea splashed across her skin. With a small cry, she dropped the cup and pulled back her burned hand. The other women rushed to ask whether she was hurt. Maria, however, slammed her hands against the table. Luelle flinched beneath the sudden outburst as Maria demanded to know how she dared make such a mistake after all the punishments she'd already received. Sierra quickly protested that it had been her own fault and begged Maria not to punish Luelle. Maria sighed theatrically, praising Sierra's kindness, but insisted she could not overlook this incident. Luelle had nearly burned her delicate hand. She ordered another maid to take Luelle away, and it sounded like further instructions were to be added. But before the command could be carried out, another cup shattered against the floor. Roxanna calmly apologized, claiming her hand had slipped. Then she turned towards her mother, gently pointing out how red her hand had become, and suggesting she run it under cold water. Perhaps see a doctor in case of a burn. Maria immediately agreed that Sierra should not risk injury. At Roxanna's quiet instruction, a maid escorted Sierra from the room. The remainder of the gathering passed with the ladies watching a brutal fight between two ghouls kept in conditions similar to Luelle's. Roxanna observed in silent disgust, at least satisfied that her mother had been removed from the spectacle. The uneasy calm ended when several guards rushed into the garden. They reported that Cassis had escaped. Roxanna asked coldly how a prisoner could free himself from shackles and a locked room. The guards explained that they'd been escorting him to the tea party when he suddenly fled. Her voice darkened as she demanded to know who had authorized them to bring him. They claimed the order had come from Dion and assumed she approved it. They had little chance to say more. Roxanna struck them down with swift slashes, leaving them writhing on the floor and spreading pools of blood. If they truly believed she was foolish enough to accept such an explanation, they would already be begging for their lives. She demanded Cass's last known location. The southwest hallway, one of them gasped. Jeremy had already gone after him. At her signal, Emily immediately left to pursue them. Roxanna then turned back to Maria and offered a brief apology before preparing to leave. Maria hurried after her, offering assistance, though Roxanna politely declined. The woman seemed uneasy, likely worried the situation might create friction between them, especially since her own son had been mentioned. Before anything further could be said, the ground began to tremble. The ladies scrambled to their feet as a massive shadow darkened the greenhouse skylight. The glass shattered a moment later as an enormous creature crashed through. A piercing screech filled the air. Someone shouted the creature's name, a Carantal. As the woman scattered in panic, Roxanna simply tied back her hair and stepped forward. It would seem she would have to deal with this first. As people scrambled for safety, Roxanna prepared to face the escaped monster. Even then, her thoughts drifted uneasily to what might be happening outside, and to Cassis. About half an hour earlier, Jeremy had encountered the guards escorting Cassis to the tea party. He quickly guessed Dion was behind the arrangement. Yet, he also knew Roxanna would be furious if she learned of it. So, he angrily ordered the guards to confirm with Roxanna before bringing Cassis along. Then, he noticed the hickey on Cassis's neck, Roxanna's mark, and jealousy flared. He lunged at Cassis, who evaded him with ease, which only worsened Jeremy's temper. Unable to harm Cassis outright while he belonged to Roxanna, Jeremy chose another approach. Raising his voice, he suddenly accused Cassis of trying to escape. Cassis deflected Jeremy's claws and jabs as best he could, but the chains at his neck and wrists slowed him. He forced himself to stay calm. Realizing Cassis would not be easy prey, Jeremy changed tactics. He released a horde of tarantulas. The creatures tore through several guards, yet Cassis still managed to cut down a number of them. Meanwhile, Jeremy lounged on a nearby tree branch, watching the chaos he had unleashed. Cassis's survival, even after fighting so many monsters, surprised him. He idly wondered whether the shackles were still functioning, chuckling he might have been a little reckless. Cassis dying would have caused trouble, but in Jeremy's mind, the man should have been more obedient anyway. At that moment, Dion arrived, dragging a bloodied sword behind him. In a calm, almost lazy drawl, he asked whether Jeremy had taken his dog out for a walk to cause such a commotion. Jeremy and Cassis could only stare at him in uneasy silence. At first glance, Cassis thought he was looking at Lanta Grease. A second look told him otherwise. The man before him was younger. Jeremy cast Dion a glance and spat on the ground. His dislike for him was undisguised. Dion asked whether Jeremy had opened the hutch, remarking that he was still as reckless as ever. It had never been charming, he added. At Jeremy's age, it was simply pathetic. Jeremy growled through clenched teeth and demanded to know why Dion thought the situation happened in the first place. After all, Dion had been the one to order the toy out of his room without Roxanna's permission. Dion's gaze sharpened. He replied that his mother must be plotting something again, then looked towards Cassis and remarked that it was surprising to see the blue air strutting about like a horny little dog. Not long ago, he had wiped out an entire search party most likely Pedelian men sent to retrieve Cassis. They'd been more persistent than he expected. Electricity crackled faintly around Cassis as he asked whether Dion had truly expected no reaction after admitting to killing his men. They clashed in the next moment. Steel met in a flurry of feints and parries. Before both men stepped back, Dion observed that Cassis was impressive for a Pedelian, and clever as well. Cassis, already breathing a little harder, silently cursed that the man was not even trying. He then asked why Dion was holding back. Dion replied that killing him was someone else's job. The implication struck Cassis immediately. It was a setup. Dion acknowledged his deduction with mild approval, adding that it was a shame the guards' efforts had gone to waste. At that moment, Sierra came running in their direction, calling for Roxanna. Cassis was surprised to see her. The tea party was meant to be at the greenhouse, so he wondered what she was doing here. She suddenly stopped when she noticed them. At the same instant, another escaped Carental burst into the clearing. Dion raised his sword to engage it, and Cassis recognized a brief chance to escape. Instead, Dion flung the creature towards Sierra. Jeremy shouted in alarm, asking whether Dion had lost his mind. That would kill Roxanna's mother. Cassis realized he would not reach her in time. He aimed for the creature's head, and through his spear, it struck its mark. But the chains reacted immediately, sending a violent surge up his arms and through his body. The shock forced his body into spasms before he collapsed to the ground. Dion walked over and pressed his boot against Cassis's back. Lifting the spear, he drove it down onto the manacle around Cassis's wrist. The chains activated, delivering another prolonged jolt. Cassis's body jerked helplessly until the movement gradually ceased, and he lost consciousness. Jeremy hurried to Sierra and asked if she was hurt. She remained kneeling on the ground, staring fixedly at Cassis's slumped form. Then, she clutched her head and began to moan, pleading for them to stop and begging that Achille not be killed. Her body trembled as she collapsed into a quivering heap. Jeremy felt a rising panic. The situation was beginning to look very bad. As if answering that thought, a voice suddenly cut through the scene, asking what exactly they thought they were doing. It was Roxanna. Emily returned in time to help Roxanna deal with the escaped creatures. Her ability allowed her to draw power by sacrificing a portion of her lifespan. Roxanna permitted her to deal with the remaining Carantules quickly, but warned her to not rely on that power. Griselda, Roxanna's older half-sister, soon appeared as well. She snapped the bars off several cages and handed them to Emily as makeshift weapons, then remarked that she could finish the rest herself. It was probably one of Jeremy's usual pranks, she said. She urged Roxanna to return at once before something irreversible happened to her toy. When Roxanna reached the scene, she had expected Cassis to have been subdued, but what she had not expected was that Dion would be the one responsible. She asked Jeremy what her mother was doing here, and he flinched, explaining that Sierra had been worried and had gone looking for her. Roxanna replied that it was dangerous outside and that her mother should be escorted indoors immediately. Jeremy readily agreed. At that moment, Maria arrived, loudly asking Sierra what had happened and whether the monster had attacked her. She then turned to Dion, asking if he had killed the creature, and praised him, claiming she had never felt prouder of him. Jeremy exploded, shouting that Dion had been the one to throw the monster towards Sierra in the first place. Meanwhile, Sierra remained kneeling, muttering in shock for Achille not to be killed, repeating the plea again and again. Maria abruptly shrieked at Dion, demanding to know why he had killed him and accusing him of causing the situation. At the same moment, Roxanna stepped forward and slapped him across the face. Not only had he tried to steal her toy, he had also endangered her mother, and that she would not forgive. Dion slowly raised a hand to his cheek, touching the reddening mark. With a faint smile, he asked if that was the thanks he received for capturing her runaway dog. Roxanna replied that she never asked for his help. Cassis belonged to her, and only she had the right to punish him. He should step aside. Instead, Dion reached out and lightly touched her cheek, remarking he would let it go this time, since he had enjoyed himself far more than he expected. He hadn't seen Roxanna this upset for a long while, and it put him in a good mood, though it would have been even better if she had cried like last time. With that, he turned and walked away. Jeremy immediately burst into furious curses, shouting for him to stay away from Roxanna. Returning to her quarters, Emily reported that the guards stationed at the greenhouse had been punished according to Roxanna's orders. Some were already dead when she found them, most likely killed by the escaped Carantules. Because of that, it would be difficult to prove whether Dion had truly been behind the incident. Some witnesses had claimed that Lady Maria had actually ordered Cassis to be released, using Dion's name as a pretense, and then abandoned the plan when things began to fall apart. Roxanna smirked at their report. In truth, She was the one who used Dion's name to have Cassis escorted to the greenhouse. She simply had not expected events to spiral the way they had, or that Jeremy would open the monster hutch. Even so, the outcome had not entirely been unfavorable. Cassis would have never managed to escape the mansion anyway. Only half of the blueprints she'd shown him were genuine. Her intention was to make him realize that escape without her was impossible. Instead, he surprised her by choosing to save her mother rather than seize his chance to flee. For that, she ordered Emily to throw him into the hallucination room as punishment. After Emily left, another maid arrived with a message from Sierra. She woke up from sedation but was still too weak to come herself. Roxanna decided to visit her instead. Sierra was so agitated about Roxanna's safety that she had to calm her down, showing her arms and neck, and pointing out that there was not a single scratch on her. Only then did Sierra finally breathe a sigh of relief. Roxanna then asked what she'd been doing outside earlier. She thought her mother was resting in her room. Had she not heard about the breach at the monster hutch? Sierra replied that she had heard and grew worried about Roxanna, which was why she had gone to the greenhouse. Roxanna thanked her for worrying about her. Then, after a brief pause, she added quietly that she wished she hadn't worried. Sierra was left devastated, stammering without knowing what to say. Roxanna continued anyway, remarking that there was little her mother could have done in that situation. Between the two of them, it was her mother who collapsed from shock, not her. Sierra tried to speak, calling her name, but Roxanna cut her off. She reiterated that she was perfectly fine, and she should be more concerned about herself. If there'd been real danger, did her mother truly believe she could have protected her? She pressed further, pointing out that someone could have used her mother as bait to escape. The breach at the hutch had not been the only issue that day. What if her toy had chosen to harm her or take her hostage instead? Had she considered any of that before rushing out? By then, Roxanna had already turned towards the door, saying if her mother truly cared about her, she should not repeat such actions. It only created more problems. Her mother could only watch in growing distress. At the threshold, Roxanna cast one last glance back and added that she would hate to start seeing her as a burden. Then she left, the door slamming shut behind her. Out in the hallway, Emily approached with an update. He had already passed through the main gate. Roxanna acknowledged it and moved at once. She needed to reach him before anyone else did. On her way downstairs, she encountered her father and announced she had good news. Intrigued, he invited her to continue. She revealed that she had successfully hatched the poisoned butterfly egg, presenting one as proof, while privately noting that everything was now in place. The final act could begin. Lant asked what she intended to raise them into. She replied lightly that they would become killer butterflies, adding that she was honored to contribute to the family by controlling such a powerful weapon. Unnoticed, Dion had drawn near, listening. Lant laughed, expressing that he always had high expectations of her before taking his leave. As his footsteps faded, Dion stepped forward to stand beside her. Roxanna thought it was a shame she had only slapped one side of his face, then asked what he would have done if Cassis had not saved her mother. He replied that he would have done nothing, casting her a sideways glance before leaning in to murmur that he already told her he enjoyed seeing her cry. She scoffed and turned away, saying that was something he would never witness again for as long as he lived. Further down the hallway, she paused before a mirror. Studying her reflection, she remarked that she had finally become the person her mother wanted her to be, a true Agrice, and the one who resembled her father the most. Her hand tightened into a fist, even as a faint smirk touched her lips. The thought disgusted her. A repressed memory surfaced. Sylvia was weeping over her brother's lifeless body, begging him to wake. The image shifted. Now, it was Cassis lying alone instead. Voices echoed, speaking of power as a curse when left uncontrolled, forbidding its use. They reminded him of who they were, the noble judges, the Pedelians, and of the weight of his name. One declared that anyone who lost their dignity would perish, before pointing at him and forbidding him from ever using his power again. The vision shattered. Cassis stirred, clutching his head as his eyes snapped open. A voice beside him suggested he should rest a little longer. He turned sharply towards it. The figure told him not to look at her like that. It was only a hallucination. He was in the hallucination room, after all. He found himself lying with his head in Roxanna's lap. She smiled down at him, explaining that she was not real, no more than anything else around them. Then, more quietly, she apologized and thanked him for saving her mother. As her fingers brushed his hair aside, she admitted she'd not felt anything like this in a long time. He had no reason to stay, yet he did. Cassis became acutely aware of her presence. the faint warmth of her breath against his face. She went on to say that she almost wished he were someone she could hate. It would have made things easier. Telling him to rest, she leaned closer and gently covered his eyes. Cassis thought distantly that it had been a strange day. Too many things had happened, yet none of them seemed to matter in the moment. It felt like a brief reprieve where both of them could forget everything else. She told him that once he opened his eyes again, he would return to reality. For a fleeting second, he found himself wishing the moment would never end. While Roxanna tended to Cassis in the hallucination room, Jeremy took responsibility for most of the incident. She never intended for him to be punished, but he'd gone too far by releasing the monsters. He had nearly ruined everything, and she saw no reason to intervene on his behalf. Both their mothers had always looked at them as though they were monsters. The thought stirred an old memory, Jeremy holding her hand, remarking that he'd always expected her mother to be different, since she always came running in panic whenever something happened to her. Roxanna found it strange that that memory surfaced now. As for Dion, his punishment for trying to take what belonged to her had been decided quickly. He'd been sent to the Carantules' habitat at dawn. In truth, it was hardly a punishment for someone like him. No one led monster hunts better than Dion. It was little more than an excuse to send him out again, and a rather calculated one. At least, it meant she wouldn't have to see him for a while. Still, the thought of his knowing, condescending gaze lingered unpleasantly. When Roxanna entered Cassis's cell later, she carried a basket filled with flowers. Cassis asked about it, and she replied that someone had left it outside her door, pulling an envelope from the bouquet. He wondered if it was from her father's men. She told him it was from her mother's side instead. Reading the note, she mused inwardly at Maria's audacity. Barely 3 days had passed since the incident, yet she was already inviting them to another tea party, as if nothing had happened. Roxanna's gaze lingered on the flowers. Many of them were poisonous, useful, potentially. Then she noticed a small bottle nestled among them. Opening it, she caught the scent immediately. A love potion. She wasn't surprised. One of Maria's maids had been lingering in the hallway earlier, and people must have noticed the marks on Cassis's neck during the chaos. Quietly, she placed the bottle back in the basket. Cassis then asked about her mother. Roxanna replied that Sierra was recovering, still shaken, but otherwise fine. She observed that he seemed calmer lately. Perhaps the recent events had shifted something. Perhaps he was beginning to believe she was actually trying to help him. After a pause, Cassis asked whether the man who had activated the shackles was Dion Agrease. He went on to ask, more heatedly, whether she knew Dion had deliberately thrown the monster towards her mother. She answered that she did, and he seemed unable to understand how anyone could do such a thing. Her reply was simple. It was because he was an Agrease. Before he could press further, she changed the subject. There were 2 things she needed to tell him. First, the secret passage she had mentioned earlier would be opening soon. He clarified that it was the one she had pointed out on the map, and she confirmed it. The delay, she explained, was due to its mechanism. It only opened at certain times. The second piece of news caught his full attention. She'd seen someone near the area the previous day, someone who might have been sent by his family. At that, Cassis's eyes widened. She described the man, brown hair, green eyes, around his mid-30s, wearing an eye patch. He seemed like the group's leader. Cassis immediately asked where she'd seen him. On the southwestern border, she replied, adding that they should send proof that he was still alive. He asked for one of the flowers. She handed it to him without question. Plucking a leaf, he bit into his finger until blood welled up, then used it to mark symbols onto the surface before returning it. Roxanna silently noted that it was likely some form of coded message used by the Pedalians. Cassis admitted that he could not fully trust her, and they both knew why. She couldn't trust him either. Even if he told her he fully trusted her, he doubted she would believe him. Still, whatever her motives were, he felt he should thank her for what she had done. Roxanna said nothing at first. A strange tightness settled into her chest, unfamiliar and unwelcomed. She dismissed it, replying it was too soon for gratitude. He was still her prisoner. He agreed, then, after a brief pause, said there was something he'd been meaning to ask. Holding up the flower she'd given him, he asked if she knew what kind it was. She stared at him silently. Roxanna said she did not know the flower's name and asked why. He confirmed that it was indeed poisonous. Though he did not know the exact species, he was certain it was deadly. She questioned how he could know that. He replied simply that he had seen it before. She immediately rejected the claim. There was no way he could have encountered it. The flower was an Agrease creation. Outsiders were not supposed to know of it. Cassis did not argue. He only said she could believe him or not, but she should be more careful from now on. His gaze unsettled her. She wondered what he thought of her. whether he thought she didn't believe him. That wasn't how she intended to come off. He then added that if she chose not to believe him, she should at least keep her distance from the flowers. Whether she trusted him or not, it was for her own good. After a brief pause, Roxanna said that she did believe him. There was no reason for him to lie about something like that. She even laughed lightly as she said it. Even so, doubt lingered. How did he know? What was he hiding? A few days later, while walking through the halls, Roxanna felt her steps falter. A wave of fatigue made her unsteady. She'd been overextending herself, keeping watch over both Dion and the Pedalians while raising the poison butterflies. Footsteps approached. Charlotte appeared, sneering as she remarked that Roxanna's toy had apparently tried to escape. Roxanna responded with a pleasant smile, noting that Charlotte seemed to have survived the punishment room intact. Perhaps it hadn't been severe enough. She should have stayed longer. Charlotte snapped, shouting for her to shut up. She heard about the chaos Cassis caused and insisted Roxanna did not deserve to own him. If it had been her, she would have crippled him from the start. Roxanna knew Charlotte would have done exactly that. The girl's persistence bordered on obsession. Charlotte went on, accusing Roxanna of manipulating her into breaking into the dungeon, so she would be punished, clearing the way for Roxanna to claim the toy. She called her a liar, but Roxanna dismissed it bluntly, saying Charlotte had only been foolish enough to fall for it. The accusations continued. She then claimed that Roxanna had avoided punishment, that she had lied about the poisoned butterflies, and that she had deceived their father. Charlotte swore she would take the toy back by any means necessary. Roxanna mocked her, remarking that even after time in the punishment room, she'd learned nothing. She told Charlotte to see for herself. With a small motion, Roxanna released a cluster of butterflies. They fluttered towards Charlotte, settling lightly on the exposed skin. At first, the contact seemed harmless until they began to feed. Before Charlotte fully understood what was happening, the flesh where they touched was stripped away, leaving bone beneath. Her screams filled the corridor as she collapsed. Roxanna watched without emotion. She reminded her quietly that she had warned her before. She had no tolerance for foolish children. Next time, Charlotte should try not to disappoint. Then, Roxanna turned and walked away, leaving Charlotte trembling on the floor. By the time she reached Cassis's room, Roxanna could barely stay upright. Not yet, she thought. Just a little further. She stumbled inside, shut the door, and slid down against it. Cassis turned at the sound, beginning to ask what was wrong. She vomited violently, blood spilling onto the floor before her body gave way. Dimly, she realized she had underestimated the cost. It was her first time using the poisoned butterflies like that, but she had not expected such a backlash. Cassis strained against his chains, then, with a sharp curse, forced them apart. Even through the haze, Roxanna registered it. He'd broken the shackles with his bare hands. Was he trying to escape again? He could not. If he were caught this time, he might not survive. Darkness closed in. Cassis shouted her name, just as she lost consciousness. In his room, Cassis found his thoughts circling back to every encounter he had with Dion Grease since the incident. Dion's casual remark about wiping out the search party sent to find him, the memory of a boot pressing him into the ground while the chains coursed electricity through his body. That beast that would have otherwise killed Roxanna's mother had Cassis not killed it first, and Dion would have let it. Then, there was the way he spoke to Roxanna, how he would have enjoyed it more if she cried like before. Cassis's jaw tightened. There was something fundamentally wrong with this family. Rules, morality, even basic human decency, none of it seemed to apply to them. Spending an extended period of time in that household would drive anyone sane to madness. And yet, his thoughts drifted back to Roxanna. She thanked him for saving her mother. What would happen to her once he escaped? The question unsettled him more than it should have. The deeper he became entangled with her, the more uneasy he felt, and the less certain he was of his own decisions. It was in the middle of that restless spiral that she had stumbled into the room. He called out to her, alarm rising as she collapsed. Had she been poisoned? Through labored breaths, she murmured that he could not go outside, that it was too dangerous. Her voice was barely audible as she promised she would protect him, lifting a trembling hand to brush against his lip. Cassis caught her hand instinctively. It was cold, far too cold. He told her she needed a doctor immediately. She refused. No one could find out. No one could see her like this. Her strength gave out, and her hand slipped from his grasp. The words echoed again in his mind. A power you cannot control is not a gift, but a curse. You are not to use it like this again. We are the noble judges, the Pedalians. Never forget your name. Whoever loses his dignity shall perish. He clenched his teeth. If he let her die like this, could he ever forgive himself? The final warning rang louder than the rest. He was forbidden from using his power. For a moment, he hesitated. Then something within him gave way. The image of chains shattering flashed through his mind, followed by a surge of blinding light. Energy crackled through him as he gathered her into his arms, fully aware of the cost. Death brushed close. Still, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. At first, there was no response. Then, her body twitched faintly. Her eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but he kissed her again, more firmly this time. After a moment, she raised a weak hand and pushed him back, telling him to stop. He demanded to know how she could still say that in her condition. She insisted she would be fine, that he didn't need to help her. He flinched at the words, but he could see it clearly now. That look in her eyes. It was the look of someone standing at the edge, as if her heart could stop at any moment. And in that instant, everything fell into place. He finally understood why she lingered in his thoughts, why he could never quite turn away from her. It was clear to him now. Roxanna opened her eyes to a soft, pulsing glow surrounding her. She was still in Cassis's arms. The pain was gone. Her breathing had steadied, her body no longer racked by agony. Whatever power he used, it completely neutralized the poison. The realization unsettled her. If she had not stopped him in time, everything she'd been working towards might have been undone. Then, another thought struck, and she froze. She'd seen this before. Sylvia had possessed the same kind of ability, healing through a kiss, strongest when sealed through sensual contact. That had been the reason Sylvia was reduced to a tool, passed between different men and powerful families. Roxanna had forgotten that detail. What? How could something as crazy as that be forgotten? What she'd not realized until now was that such a power could run in a family. Was that how Cassis could identify poisonous plants so easily? Pushing the thought aside, she told him she was fine, that she would not die so easily. She reminded him that she'd already said she'd protect him until he escaped. He questioned why she kept saying that. He wasn't her brother. This made her pause. Of course, she knew that. The comparison had only been a convenient excuse to lower his guard, to get closer. Cassis and her brother were nothing alike. And yet, the fact that he believed it irritated her more than it should have. She'd never try to replace Achille, nor did she want anyone, least of all Dion, to think her brother was her weakness. More than that, she simply did not want this story to end in tragedy because of Cassis's death. Out loud, she told him bluntly that he was nothing like her brother and should not flatter himself. The insult came easily, sharper than usual, but closer to the truth than anything she'd said before. It was the first time she spoke without calculation. Images of Achilles standing together with her came up. It was bright, happy. It shifted, his back towards her, casting a worried glance over his shoulder. She stared at him, eyes full of terror. Then, tears trickled down her cheek. Achilles' hands reached out and placed a crown of flowers on her head. He placed his temple against her and held her. She felt warm. Cassis's voice cut through, told her to rest until she felt better. His hand brushed away the tears on her cheek. She avoided him for the next few days. When she finally showed up again, she came with a sheet of paper. She greeted him awkwardly, commenting on what a pleasant evening it was. The words sounded off, even to her own ears. Cassis watched her for a brief moment, then agreed with a faint grin. The brief exchange left her uncharacteristically self-conscious. She handed him the paper without further pretense. It was written in a code she could not decipher. From his reaction, however, it was clearly good news. As he read, his attention shifted. He asked about the butterflies gathering nearby. Roxanna stiffened. She had not summoned them. A possibility crossed her mind. They had tasted Cassis's blood when he revived her. Was that enough to draw them now? She told herself it shouldn't matter. These were not the lethal ones. Cassis remarked that they seemed to want his blood. Roxanna dismissed it, saying they only fed on hers, though inwardly, she cursed how perceptive he was. He studied her quietly, and she found herself uneasy under his gaze. Then, he spoke again. He said there was something he needed to ask. What would happen to her after he escaped? Roxanna scoffed inwardly. The idea that he might be worried about her felt almost absurd. She had taken her time crafting the escape plan precisely to ensure her own survival. Did he really think she would risk her life for his sake? With a quiet sigh, she told him he should remember that she was not his sister either. If anything, he ought to be worrying about his own. Still, something about the way he looked at her unsettled her. Cassis asked whether he was not allowed to be concerned about her. Roxanna flinched at that. It was a miscalculation on her part. She thought she understood him, that she had him under control, but now it felt as though the balance had shifted. She told him she had a plan of her own. Since he asked, she admitted she hadn't explained it yet, but she would do so in the morning. For now, she had already directed the Pedalian men to a safe location. When the time came, he only needed to meet them there. She urged him to listen carefully when she explained everything later. After leaving his room, Roxanna acknowledged the lie to herself. The men had not been sent anywhere safe. She intended to direct them to the northern border, near the swamp in the dark forest, a place no one returned from. It was only then she had begun to understand why the Agreases had tormented Cassis so mercilessly in the original story. He did not belong among them. He was fundamentally different, like a circle forced into a world of sharp-edged shapes. The memory of him wiping her tears surfaced unexpectedly. She bit her lip in irritation. She should have pushed his hand away. This was getting dangerous. She needed to get him out of that house as soon as possible. Later, in the poisonous greenhouse, Roxanna sat watching the butterflies feed. The guards had brought in an animal carcass. The swarm descended upon it, stripping flesh with unsettling efficiency until only blood and bone remained. The guards struggled to hide their terror. Roxanna instructed them to bring more bodies quickly. If the butterflies were not satisfied, she warned they would seek other sources. The guards hurried off without hesitation. Nearby, a pair of maids whispered that something about her had changed. She'd always been distant, but lately, she'd become frightening, like the butterflies themselves. Their voices faltered when Roxanna glanced in their direction. Unsure whether she had heard them, they fell silent in fear. Roxanna returned her attention to the swarm. Her thoughts drifted back to Cassis. It occurred to her that he might have been capable of escaping at any time. If so, then his continued presence was a choice. And if it was a choice, then it was likely because of her. The realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit. He should have been prioritizing his own survival. A voice broke through her thoughts. Her father approached, asking how the butterflies were progressing. Roxanna rose and curtsied, replying that they were growing stronger, just as he had intended. Still, she believed they could improve further. Lant told her to inform him if she needed anything. She didn't hesitate. She said she wanted to feed them something larger and stronger. It would accelerate their growth. As he considered her request, Roxanna noted to herself that the monthly evaluation was only 3 days away. By then, Dion would have returned. Everything was beginning to fall into place. A butterfly settled lightly on Roxanna's outstretched finger, carrying news that the Bedelian men had reached the northern border. She smiled to herself, wondering how they were faring with the welcome she had prepared, specifically selecting the ones most drawn to human flesh. It had been a month since Cassis was brought to the mansion. Once he was gone, things could finally return to normal. She later brought a tray of food to his room, telling him to eat before it grew cold. She paused, however, when he remarked that she did not look well. Lately, she'd been losing more blood than usual from sustaining the poisoned butterflies. On top of that, she increased her poison intake. She brushed it aside, and instead mentioned that she had news of the Pedalians, asking whether he was not concerned about them. Cassis replied that he trusted Isidore. Roxanna countered that he clearly did not extend the same trust to her. At that, Cassis' expression tightened. Light flickered around him, and with a sharp crack, the manacles around his wrists split apart and fell away. Roxanna noted silently that he wasn't even trying to conceal his strength anymore. Before she could react, he reached out and took her hand. Light shimmered faintly where their skin met. Her voice rose sharply as she demanded to know what he was doing, and who had given him permission to touch her. He pointed out that she touched him often enough. She denied any deeper meaning, insisting she was simply irritated, though his faint grin suggested he did not believe her. Cassis, for his part, knew that if she collapsed again, it would only complicate his escape plan. Roxanna closed her eyes briefly at the contact, then reminded him firmly not to forget that she was in a grease. He knew that. A few days passed. The monthly evaluation was only a day away. Then, deep into the night, a high-pitched security sound shattered the stillness. The mansion's security system. There was an intruder. The younger Agrease siblings reacted with eager excitement, already dividing combat roles amongst themselves. Lant moved calmly toward the corridor windows, observing that the Bedelians were more persistent than he expected. He thought he eliminated them all, yet they made it inside. Roxanna stepped out and asked what was happening. He told her to check whether her pet was still where he was supposed to be. She confirmed that it was likely the Pedalians, and upon his agreement, she turned and left at once. Watching her go, Lant noted to himself that she caught on quickly, just like him. Roxanna entered Cassis's room and told him it was time. He nodded. The mansion continued to reverberate with the intruder alerts. As she led him out by his chains, several guards stopped them, urging her to return him to his room for safety. The Pedalians had infiltrated the estate. Roxanna lowered her voice with a small, conspiratorial smile, saying she was aware and had planned something. It was meant to be a surprise, she added, asking them to keep it secret. Flustered, the guards agreed without hesitation. She then asked where the captives were being taken. They told her the first-floor lobby, where the statue stood. Thanking them sweetly, she continued on with Cassis. Once they were out of earshot, Cassis remarked that everyone seemed infatuated with her. She dismissed it lightly, saying most people were. He was simply the exception. Then, she told him they were close. The place she had mentioned was just ahead. Until he was fully out, she warned him not to lower his guard. At the exit, Roxanna reached for the candle burning above the door, but Cassis stopped her. She explained that a spell sealed the door unless the flame was extinguished, so she pinched the wick, snuffing it out. The same would be required to close it again. She brushed off his concern, saying it was nothing and that there was no point in healing her now. When Cassis tried to respond, she cut him off, reminding him there was only one path forward and that she already told him all he needed to know. There was no time to linger. He moved toward the door, hesitated, then returned to take her hand. He said they would meet again, and as their hands touched, a faint light flickered between them. He suggested saving their goodbyes for another time and urged her to stay safe before finally letting go. The chains fell away. Then, he stepped through the door and melted into the night. Roxanna watched after him for a moment before turning back. Meanwhile, the alarm system's piercing call continued throughout the Agrease mansion. In the chaos, the guards captured an escaped Karentul. Lant ordered it to be taken alive to the magic circle. While escorting it through the lobby, the alarm abruptly ceased, leading them to realize the creature had been the cause. Lant was still angrily processing this when Roxanna appeared at the top of the stairs and asked if the sack held the intruder. He confirmed it dismissively. Smiling, she said she had prepared a gift. With a sharp pull of the chain in her hand, she dragged Cassis forward and summoned her butterflies. The swarm descended instantly. Within minutes, he was reduced to nothing amid the sound of tearing flesh and screams. Lant froze, clearly not expecting such a display. Meanwhile, the sack loosened as the creature inside struggled, and its head finally emerged. Roxanna looked at it, surprised. It was not who she had expected. He was supposed to be one of the Pedalians' men. Disappointed, she remarked that she had wanted him to witness his master's fate. Still, it no longer mattered. Her butterflies had long been eager to consume her toy. She descended the stairs slowly as Lance's shock gave way to amusement, then to unrestrained laughter. When he recovered, he praised the brutality of the act, calling it a fitting end, and commending her ingenuity. Roxanna accepted the praise with a small smile. Lance's shoulders shook with laughter as he admitted he would have relished seeing Roussel Pedalian watch his own son die in agony. Roxanna replied that although the intruder had not been one of their intended targets, at least her butterflies had been well fed, and she described as more generosity than a Pedalian deserved. Lant agreed, praising the spectacle as magnificently done. As the moment faded, she remarked that it was late and suggested he rest. He echoed the sentiment, and she excused herself. Back in her room, Roxanna instructed Emily to keep everyone away and thanked her for the day's efforts. Once the door closed and silence settled, her composure broke. She sank to the floor, coughing up blood, her thoughts drifting to Cassis and whether he had made it safely through the dark forest. Letting him escape had required revealing her butterfly's true nature, or at least part of it. What no one knew was that she had secretly raised another set, bred not to kill, but to induce hallucinations. The Cassis who had been devoured before the others had been nothing more than an illusion. It was the only way to ensure his escape, while preserving her own position. If all had gone as planned, the Pedalian's men would be waiting near the hidden passage, with her butterflies lingering to shield him from whatever lurked in the forest. She studied her hand, recalling his attempt to heal the burn from the candle, and let out a faint chuckle. The injury had been minor, yet the memory still lingered. Despite everything, she could not quite believe he would die out there. The sound of the door opening cut through her thoughts. Footsteps followed. Turning, she found Dion behind her, Emily already subdued. The inconvenience registered immediately. he remarked that word had spread about Cassis Bedelian being fed to her butterflies. She dismissed it, wiping the blood from her mouth and asking why it concerned him. Instead of answering, he asked where she had hidden him. Before she could respond, he seemed to reach his own conclusion, idly catching a strand of her hair as he spoke. The dark forest on the northern border. She might deceive the others, but not him. Though he admitted a certain admiration for the execution, his tone sharpened as he speculated. These particular butterflies brought hallucinations, not just death. Perhaps more than one had been raised. Roxanna called the idea absurd, but he brushed that aside. The truth, he implied, was obvious. When she asked if he intended to expose her, he answered with a question of his own. Perhaps he should send guards to the northern border, he mused, if only to tear Cassis apart and see how she would react. As he spoke, he caught a passing butterfly and crushed it in his hand, the gesture as deliberate as his threat. Dion pressed her for an answer, unable to understand why she would go to such lengths for Cassis. As he turned to leave, Roxanna stopped him. Her voice softened, and when she reached up, her blood-stained hand resting against his cheek, his resistance faltered. She noted, almost to herself, how easily he yielded, how simple it was to bend him. She understood what he wanted from her, even if she felt nothing but contempt in return. The revulsion stayed buried beneath her composure. Aloud, she relented. If that was what he desired, she would indulge it. Her touch shifted, trailing up his arms before settling around his neck, her tone turning dangerously intimate, as she suggested they might as well descend into ruin together. In that moment, she formed a binding pact she knew would only end in destruction. Elsewhere, Sylvia demanded answers about her brother. Jeremy, uneasy, admitted the truth. The boy had died not long after being brought into their household. He tried to brush past it, reminding her of a promise and complaining about the people she kept company with, but his words only sharpened her grief. She snapped, cutting him off with a fury that bordered on hysteria, unable to accept what she had spent so long searching for. He stumbled over an apology, insisting he had not known the boy's identity at the time. Then, with careless insensitivity, he offered something else. Mentioning his sister's habit of collecting eyes, he suggested that Roxanna might still have them. He even proposed to retrieve them for her. Sylvia's laughter broke into something unhinged. Jeremy attempted to follow her mood, awkwardly urging her not to be upset. But the shift had already happened. She declared her intent plainly. She would kill him, and not just him, but every member of his family. The threat hung heavy as she invoked a brutal symmetry. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, life for life. Her tears fell as she vowed to make them suffer, to personally see each one destroyed. An excerpt from The Abysmal Flower. 3 years later, Fontaine Agrees, eldest son of Lant, moved through a snow-covered expanse, irritation simmering beneath the surface. He resented how Dion claimed credit for his success, for a success he believed was his, and how their father's favor seemed increasingly misplaced. Seeking an outlet, he reached for his sword, considering the crude distractions available to him, though none felt sufficient. What he wanted was blood. Footsteps approached from behind, interrupting the thought. A voice cautioned him against going further. There was nothing left alive in that direction. When he turned, he found Roxanna before him. Fontaine questioned why she had come all the way out to the forest to feed her butterflies, suggesting there were easier options within the mansion. Roxanna replied that her pets had grown tired of the same kind of food and had become selective. She studied him briefly, noting his mood had been sour from the moment he arrived. It seemed as though he had come looking for something to vent his frustration on. When she guessed the cause, another reprimand from their father, he reacted sharply, telling her to be quiet. Unbothered, she continued, mentioning that she had heard Dion had once again taken credit for his efforts. The pattern, she added, was familiar. He had done the same to her before. Fontaine's irritation deepened, and she pressed further, suggesting their father's judgment was slipping, his favoritism growing increasingly unreasonable. She went on to question Dion's suitability as heir, describing him as unstable and reckless, before contrasting him with someone more dependable, someone like Fontaine. The suggestion landed as intended. He seized on it, venting his frustration openly, blaming his situation on their father's bias. He pointed out that Roxanna herself had been overlooked despite coming of age, denied opportunities that would have strengthened her standing. She responded with quiet resignation, remarking that she was valued more as decoration than as a contender. Fontaine clicked his tongue. Their father had reduced her worth to her appearance. For all her reputation as the master of poisoned butterflies, her situation had been dismissed. There was even doubt about the rumors surrounding her past extermination of the Bedelian heir. She shifted the topic, expressing mild disappointment that she would not be attending the upcoming assembly with him. The remark stirred something else in him, something less restrained. She might be his half-sister, but once he became head of the family, he'd take her for himself. Oh, of course they're doing the Game of Thrones Alabama storytelling. Look at this man's devious look in his imagination. He reassured her that he would not allow Dion to inherit their father's position. She answered with a smile, placing her trust in him, calling him the only one she could rely on before turning away. The moment she left, her thoughts betrayed her true opinion. He was nothing more than a tool, and an oblivious one at that. As she walked, a voice called out to her from the trees. Jeremy emerged, asking if he could gouge out Fontaine's eyes. She declined, advising patience. It would be more effective to act when Fontaine had fallen further. Jeremy agreed readily, criticizing Fontaine's arrogance. Though she appeared amused, Roxanna understood what Jeremy's presence implied. Dion must have returned as well. Back at the mansion, she told Jeremy she needed to see their father and would meet him the next day. He made her promise to see him first thing in the morning before leaving. Since the incident years later, Jeremy had become noticeably more attached to her. During a past evaluation, she had warned him to complete his task without hesitation, regardless of what he saw. When the trial subjected him to hallucinations, it was her image that appeared, believing that he had killed her. He broke down, overwhelmed with guilt. She calmed him, reminding him that she'd only followed her instructions. It had not been real, she assured him, and if he hesitated, he would have been the one to die. There was no reason for him to blame himself. The memory lingered, only briefly, before it was interrupted. A maid approached to inform her that her mother, Lady Sierra, was asking to see her. Roxanna noticed many people were looking for her that day. She asked the maid if her mother was with Lady Maria. The maid said Sierra was alone. Roxanna still needed to see her father first. When the maid nervously asked if she would visit afterward, Roxanna told Emily to check immediately whether Maria could join Sierra in her room for the scheduled tea party. Her mother had not attended one in a long while and was likely bored. The maid pointed out that Sierra had specifically asked for Roxanna. Ignoring her, Roxanna instructed Emily to assure Maria the request would not be refused. If she hesitated over the last tea party incident, mention Dion's return. Maria would then want to comfort Sierra above all else. Turning to the maid, Roxanna said she held no grudge personally, but Beth should always prioritize her mistress. If she troubled Roxanna again with such matters, she would answer for neglecting Sierra. Beth apologized quietly. Roxanna told her to go cheer her mother up. It was her duty. At least, this one listened, she noted quietly. Beth had once served Maria. During the earlier tea party, Maria had nearly executed her when Sierra intervened. Sierra was Beth's savior, and Roxanna trusted her to care for her mother well. She knocked onto her father's study door. Lant called her in. She greeted him with a smile and stepped closer. He asked if assembly preparations were going smoothly. She confirmed everything was on track. He said the assembly was their only way to monitor their enemies, and that he trusted her to handle it as flawlessly as last year. She assured him he could rely on her. As she left the study, Dion remarked she had taken longer than expected and must have had much to discuss with their father. She replied she had known he was waiting, so she lingered deliberately. She'd been aware of his return. It had been some time. Dion lounged in an armchair, watching her. She approached and brushed hair from his face. She noted he had followed her instructions perfectly. Infuriating Fontaine. Well done, though he could still be foolish. She traced his lips and reminded him he need not report every task. Seeing his face made her ill. Dion seized her wrist. He observed her words and actions never aligned. Yet, he admitted he was glad to see her. He asked if she would not welcome him home. She could at least thank him. She asked softly if that was truly what he wanted. Leaning to his ear, she said she regretted disappointing him, but could not help despising him completely. Still, he desired her. Pathetic, she thought. He must have missed her badly to seek her first. He warned through clenched teeth that provoking him led nowhere good. Roxanna studied him, finally understanding why he wanted her tears. She chuckled softly. She told him not to act that way. At least, she was honest with him, unlike with Fontaine. If all he wanted was her body like Fontaine, perhaps he would suffer less. But she would never allow it. She pulled back until he released her wrist. She said it would be difficult for him to get what he wanted. He should find ways to entertain her instead. Who knew? If he tried hard enough, she might one day give in. Yggdrasil stood as the continent's demilitarized center and the annual meeting place for the 5 great families. The red Castros, blue Pedelians, gold Vertiums, white Fipelians, and black Agrises. This year, Roxanna attended alongside Jeremy and her father. In private, she noticed Jeremy's excitement at attending the assembly for the first time. She knew he would soon be disappointed. Dion had been expected to join them, but he had other matters and would arrive later. Roxanna preferred he stay away entirely. As their carriage passed a certain point, a sudden throb pulsed through their temples. Magic circles blanketed the area, enforced centuries ago after a white Vipellion had summoned demons to ravage Yggdrasil. The giant wards ensured neutrality. Last year, Roxanna had discovered that the circles disrupted her poison butterfly's connection in the zone, though she had also learned every magic had its flaw. The carriage stopped. Lant reminded her of her role. She confirmed she understood. To bypass the interference, the demonic creatures had to be summoned before entering Yggdrasil. Her butterflies might not function at full strength here, but they remained useful for surveillance. After disembarking, Roxanna claimed fatigue from the journey and requested to retire. Lant permitted it. Jeremy followed close behind. For the coming days, she and her butterflies would serve as Lant's eyes and ears, just as she had for the past 3 years. She intended to keep spying on him in secret. From behind her room's curtains, Roxanna watched Lant waiting for someone. The new arrivals were clearly the Gold Vertiums. In the abysmal flower, Lant had fixated on their art of puppetism, the creation of lifelike, pain, and fear-insensitive living puppets. To him, they represented ideal soldiers. Noel Vertium, the family head and one of the book's protagonists, had exploited Lant's interests. He allied with Sylvia to topple the Agreses. Yet, Noel was apathetic and rarely left his domain. Unlike Lant, he had no ambition to weaponize his puppets. Judging by the arrivals, Noel would not attend this year either. Roxanna felt reassured. There would be no interference from that quarter. Jeremy asked whether she truly intended to skip the banquet hall entirely. They sat at a tea table. She replied she would attend on the final day and suggested he go without her. He protested it would not be enjoyable alone. He had already met a few people earlier, none worth his time. Roxanna thought silently that his opinion might shift once the key figures arrived. Jeremy added he had looked forward to meeting the Vertium head, assuming the man, roughly their age, would appear this year after missing the last. Roxanna recalled the book's description: red hair, green eyes. No one matching that had emerged from the carriage. She would have to wait another year to see him in person. Voices drifted from the outside, murmurs about the Agree's daughter, and eager suggestions to approach. Roxanna proposed having dinner sent to their rooms. Jeremy agreed and hurried to inform the maids. At the door came the sound of a brief scuffle, a stifled scream, and then the wet splatter of red. He returned humming, a small smile on his face, shaking crimson from his hands. He paused, realizing he had forgotten to relay the dinner order. Roxanna said not to worry. She would summon a maid herself and pulled the bell cord. He offered a rueful apology. She observed silently that age had not tempered him. He remained as predictable and as impulsive as ever. Still, she had to admit the gawkers outside were beginning to grate on her nerves. For now, she would overlook his little outburst. While drinking tea on the terrace of her rooms, Roxanna learned that several men outside were clamoring to see her. To her, their eagerness felt half-hearted. The previous year, no one had dared approach. Whispers claimed her beauty was too daunting. At that moment, a figure passing below the terrace drew her gaze. Luzark Castro, heir of the Red Castros. He was the only one she had seen in person the year before. This assembly struck her as particularly dull. As usual, the Gold Vertiums were absent, leaving only the Blue Pedelians, White Vipellions, and Red Castros in attendance. Orca Vipellion, known as the White Demon Tamer for his endless winter hunts of demonic creatures, had never once appeared. Luzark's striking appearance matched the novel's description: vivid red hair, piercing blue eyes. The book had also noted he was afraid of women, and true to form, his expression soured into a scowl the instant his gaze met Roxanna's. Since they had no prior conflict, the look bordered on outright rudeness. Jeremy immediately bristled. He demanded to know who Luzark thought he was, glaring at his sister that way, and whether he had a death wish. Luzark retorted coolly, asking who was addressing him, and guessing from the arrogance that he must be in Agrees. Jeremy pressed on, warning him to keep his eyes off Roxanna before he demonstrated what real attitude looked like. Bored senseless since the day before, Jeremy was spoiling for a fight. Roxanna doubted someone like Luzark would rise to such bait. She was mistaken. Luzark snapped back that if the brat spoke again, he would cut out his tongue. Roxanna intervened swiftly, calling Jeremy over and telling him to stop. She apologized to Luzark on her brother's behalf, explaining that Jeremy was just fiercely protective. Luzark asked if the little brat was truly her brother, and remarked that she must have her hands full. Roxanna replied with a smile, saying that he behaved that way only towards those rude to her. Otherwise, he was quite endearing. Luzark shot her a dark glare. She excused herself, saying she should go. Since the assembly's purpose was harmony amongst the families, she hoped he would enjoy his stay. Luzark watched her depart in silence. Later that evening, word reached her that the heads of the gold Vertiums and blue Pedalians had finally arrived. Roxanna prepared to meet her father. Inwardly, she steeled herself. This meant that the female protagonist, Sylvia, had arrived at last. As Roxanna entered the general hall on Lance's arm, she glimpsed a flash of silver hair on the first landing before it vanished. Lance and Roussel Pedalian halted midway, facing each other. Roxanna curtsied and greeted Roussel politely. He cast a brief, silent glance towards Lance. With a sardonic smile, Lance remarked that it had been a while, and that Roussel's face still disgusted him as much as ever. Roussel returned the sentiment, suggesting Lance look in the mirror more often. Lance pressed on, noting that Roussel had finally brought his sheltered daughter this year, and asking what prompted the sudden change. At the mention of his daughter, Roussel's hand clenched into a fist. Lance's brazenness was unchanged, and he clearly enjoyed prodding at Roussel's protectiveness, especially since he himself had caused the loss of Cassis. Unlike the novel, however, Cassis remained alive. Aloud, Roxanna observed that Cassis seemed absent again this year. Roussel replied that he would arrive later. Lance pointed out that the same excuse had been given the previous year. 3 years had passed since anyone saw Roussel's precious son, and his continued absence suggested he was an extraordinarily busy man. Roxanna added softly that she looked forward to meeting him once he arrived, and Lance echoed the sentiment loudly, adding that he sincerely hoped the son would appear this time. Roussel turned without a word and walked away. Lance muttered a curse under his breath as he puffed a cigar, wondering aloud how Roussel planned to produce a son who no longer existed. Roxanna smirked that it was amusing to watch him struggle to conceal the truth, and Lance chuckled in agreement. Sylvia entered the hall on her father's arm and immediately drew a flood of stares. Jeremy, watching from nearby, stuck out his tongue in disgust, muttering that she looked exactly like that blue punk, and that the sight might make him vomit. Luzark, true to form, did his usual scowl her way. Roxanna privately noted that Sylvia was not quite as captivating as the novel had portrayed her. Jeremy had evidently gone downstairs for a closer look, but he showed no sign of the kidnapping impulse from the book. She thanked one of her butterflies for the update, then collapsed onto her bed with a weary sigh. Controlling them here drained her more than usual. Through the ones stationed in the hall, she confirmed Sylvia was indeed the day's main topic. The Pedalian's moonlike hair and star-bright eyes brought Cassis to mind, the last time they had met. She rose, stepped outside, and gazed at the night sky. The chill descended quickly after sunset. She should have dressed warmer. During her stroll, she noticed lights still burning in one room, Roussel Pedalian's. She wondered silently what kept him awake at 4 a.m, then realized the same question applied to her. As she walked on, she reflected on her own survival. The previous year, she had discovered a poisonous plant during a walk. Though weak enough to cause only mild stomach pain, it had felt like a small comfort in this unfamiliar place. Sylvia had just turned 18, the original starting point of the story, now irrevocably altered. Though he had not yet appeared, Roxanna anticipated the moment Lance learned Cassis was alive and well. The look on his face would be priceless entertainment. A sudden creak sounded behind her. She turned to see a figure in a jet-black robe. Could it be Dion? Roxanna had never seen anyone with that height and build aside from Dion. She had sent him on a deliberately grueling mission to delay his arrival at the assembly as long as possible. She could scarcely believe he had already finished. She resolved to pretend she hadn't noticed him. Yet somehow, the bastard had found her hiding spot. How could he possibly have known? "You're the worst," she muttered aloud. "How much more do I have to endure from you? I've told you over and over that just seeing you makes me ill. My evening was pleasant until you ruined it. I don't even want to hear your voice. Turn around and leave, Dion." The figure paused, then unfastened his cloak with a soft snap. Roxanna started to warn him not to come closer, but the words died as the cloak settled lightly around her shoulders with a faint whoosh. She stiffened, then lifted a corner to her nose. That scent. She spun around, but the figure had vanished. It wasn't Dion after all. The next morning, she joined her father. Lance asked about Dion. Roxanna said he had not arrived yet, and her father grumbled about the delay. Jeremy remarked casually that they were better off without him, though he admitted Dion was taking longer than usual. He added that who knew what mischief Dion might be up to in their absences. But there was no need to worry. This was Dion after all. He would surely appear before the banquet ended. Roxanna agreed. Lant conceded the point and suggested they go see which fools had bothered to attend this year. The three swept into the banquet hall together. Heads turned immediately. Jeremy muttered under his breath about how pathetic their stunned expressions looked. Roxanna glanced over and caught Luzark frowning at her. She had sensed someone was watching. Apparently, it had been him all along. His gaze burned fiercer than before. Nearby, a sharp voice scolded someone to stand straight, smooth his clothes, and stop clinging. The complaints grew louder with each demand. A whiny reply followed, yawning that the speaker wanted to go home and eat Nyx's homemade tarts. The first voice snapped back that they could leave tomorrow, that this was exactly why Nyx refused to travel with him, and urged Master Noel to walk properly. People were staring. Roxanna observed that the disheveled man being half dragged along must be Noel Vertium, head of the Golden Vertiums. He matched the book's description perfectly. She felt a faint relief at the confirmation. As Noel stumbled past, his eyes met hers. She offered a small smile. Startled, he tripped and fell. His attendant rushed over in alarm, noting blood from his nose. But Noel remained dazed, staring at Roxanna until the attendant hauled him away almost bodily. Dang, bro lost it. The hall erupted in murmurs and laughter. Jeremy dismissed the spectacle as moronic behavior, then turned to Roxanna, asking if she was hungry and offering her to fetch something to eat. She chuckled, thanked him, and watched him wander off to prepare a plate. Banquets were usually lively, but this one felt especially chaotic. Or perhaps her own anxiety sharpened the noise. She wondered whether anxious was even the right word. Maybe she was simply waiting for something to happen. Then, the grand doors creaked open. That's probably it, she thought. 3 silver-haired figures entered the hall. Cassius Pedelian had arrived. At the sight of Cassius, Lance's wineglass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. He stared in disbelief, exclaiming he could not possibly be alive. Jeremy rushed to Roxanna's side, asking urgently whether that was truly Cassius Pedelian. Whispers rippled through the hall. Had the blue Pedelian heir really returned after all these years? Roxanna watched Lance, inwardly noting how shocked they all must be to see someone they believed dead standing alive and well. She turned to Jeremy and told him to prepare to return home. He agreed without hesitation. Her eyes found Cassius across the room. Somewhere, a clock seemed to tick. For a moment, the hall shrank to just the two of them, as though the frozen time of their last parting had finally begun to move again. Outside on the grounds, Lant paced furiously, demanding to know what the hell was happening. Roxanna urged him to calm down. He insisted he had watched Cassius die with his own eyes. She had killed him herself, and he had witnessed every moment. There was no doubt. Roxanna replied that the real Cassius had died, so the one they had just seen must be an imposter. In the background, she noticed Noel Vertium and his attendant. The attendant was quietly scolding Noel to avoid causing more scenes. Her father argued that the newcomer radiated the same energy as any Pedelian and looked identical to the original. Roxanna suggested it must be something else entirely. Didn't they know people capable of crafting living dolls indistinguishable from humans? Lant froze, then turned to her sharply, asking if she meant a puppet. She whispered that she had told him before. The Pedelians had been in contact with the Vertiums. Though they had only learned of it recently, the exchanges might have been secret for far longer. Having lost their true heir, the Blue Pedelians could have spent the past 3 years constructing a perfect replica of Cassius. It seemed highly plausible. Lant considered this, then declared he needed to confront the Vertium head immediately. As he stalked off towards them, Roxanna allowed herself a small smirk behind his back and wished him good luck. He would find no answers, no matter how hard he searched. She thanked him silently for swallowing every word she fed him. Suddenly, a rough hand seized her arm and spun her around. She smiled at Dion and commented on the roughness of his greeting. He remarked that Cassius had decided to reappear in the world, his grip tightening painfully. He asked whether she was glad to see him. Roxanna thought silently about how amusing it was. He already knew Cassius had never died. She replied that he already knew her answer. She noted to herself that his emotions were unusually raw tonight. Through gritted teeth, he said sometimes he wanted to end her, his fingers squeezing her arm so hard she thought the bone might snap. A calm voice interrupted that such behavior was hardly appropriate, especially at this assembly. Cassis stepped forward, asking if that was how all Agrease men treated women. Roxanna glanced at him, relieved Lant was not present. If he had been, he would never accept this Cassis as fake. Dion started towards him, but Roxanna called his name. He hesitated, looked back at her, then released her arm and walked away. She turned to Cassis, thanked him quietly, then introduced herself. "My name is Roxanna Agrease. And you are?" "I am Cassis Pedelian," he replied with a courteous bow. Roxanna remarked that she was pleased to meet the blue Pedelian heir. They held each other's gaze for a moment, before he extended his hand, offering to greet her properly. She accepted with pleasure, placing her hand in his. He pressed a gentle kiss to the back of it, lingering just a fraction longer than custom demanded, then released her. She acknowledged the prestige of his position and apologized sincerely that he had witnessed such a petty sibling quarrel. When he asked whether it had truly been so trivial, she affirmed it was and asked him not to dwell on the matter. He accepted her words quietly. After a pause, Roxanna observed that it was growing late and she should return to her room. She suggested he do the same and wished him a pleasant evening. Cassis draped his cloak around her shoulders, noting the chill in the air. She turned to him and asked whether to do the same as with the cloak from the other night. He smiled and told her not to feel obliged to return it, then walked away. She remained standing, clutching the fabric to her body, watching him go. A hesitant voice interrupted. Excuse me, Lady Roxanna Agrease?" She turned around and noticed the young man's white, not silver, hair. He stammered that his master had sent him to deliver these flowers. Roxanna thanked him politely, took the bouquet, and began to walk away, despite his attempt to call her back. Cassis had finally stepped forward. The moment had arrived. The real game was about to begin. She twirled lightly in place, a quiet thrill coursing through her. Entering Lance's room, she urged him to return home at once. When he demanded to know why, she explained that Dion had just informed her Fontaine was staging a rebellion in their absence. Lance's fury flared. He'd not yet met with the Vertium head, but he ordered her to prepare immediately. They would depart without delay. As their carriage rolled away, reports reached Cassis of the Agrease's sudden departure. He asked whether everything was ready. His subordinate confirmed that all preparations had been made as instructed. Sylvia called out for him to wait. As he moved towards the door, she urged him to be careful. Cassis reassured her, asking that she return home safely with their father. He promised to finish quickly and join them soon, patting her head affectionately before she let him go. The time had come. Cassis gave the order to move. Roxanna was heading back to the place where she had first met him. No sooner than the carriage reached the Agrease mansion, Lance ordered Fontaine to be brought to the judgment room immediately. They had returned earlier than anticipated. Hearing about the judgment room, the others wondered what chaos Fontaine had stirred in their absence. Roxanna found the whole affair a nuisance, yet she understood why the judgment room inspired such dread. Its name alone revealed its purpose, the place where criminals faced judgment and execution. There, Lant weighed each crime and delivered the sentence with his own hands. It was also where Achilles' body had been discarded. No Agrease could afford to forget the fear that room commanded. In the corridor, Roxanna exchanged hushed words with Griselda. Everything ready? It was all done. They parted ways without another glance. To Jeremy, she murmured that she was leaving the corridor to him. Handle anything that unfolded outside the room. He nodded as she slipped away. Inside, Dion knelt before Lant. Fontaine stammered that this was a terrible misunderstanding. Lant exploded, calling him a backstabbing son of a bitch, and demanding to know how he dared think he could plot against him unnoticed. Blow after blow rained down, with the cane until it splintered. Fontaine huddled, blood seeping from cuts and gashes, silently wondering how his flawless plan had unraveled. Who betrayed him? Lant paused to catch his breath and called for a light for a cigar. Fontaine's mind was fixed on one suspect, Dion. Kneeling again, he tried to insist Dion had framed him. Lant refused to listen. The excuses only earned more punishment. Exhaling smoke, Lant revealed that he had set Dion to watch Fontaine from the moment he began gathering troops behind his back. Fontaine's eyes widened in horrified understanding. His father had known everything from the start. Lant seized his collar, yanked him forward, and listed the schemes Fontaine had woven in secret. He had given him chance after chance to prove himself, yet Fontaine chose betrayal. A brutal slap cracked across his face. Lant ordered a servant to bring a sword. He severed the ropes binding Fontaine's wrists, then pressed a foot on one unbound hand. Where were the soldiers Fontaine had stolen while he was away? Fontaine claimed ignorance. Before the words fully left his mouth, Lance slashed, severing the hand in a spray of red. Amid Fontaine's screams, Lance praised him coldly. He had trained him well to keep silent no matter the pain. He would remove limbs one by one until Fontaine talked. Roxanna spoke up then. There was no need to waste time on this fool. Father, Lance glanced at her. Had she located the troops? She smiled, and he commended her. Quick work, as always. She never failed to make him proud. Roxanna turned and walked to the throne at the room's vantage points. Lance asked in a low, dangerous voice what she was doing. She settled into the seat, skirts pooling around her, and replied that she had always wondered how it felt to look down from here. From this height, he looked very small. Through gritted teeth, Lance asked, how dare she insult him? She giggled softly. No need to be so angry. This was too trivial to upset him over. Had he truly never suspected her? Not even once? Everything she had done until now had been a part of the performance she staged just for him. As Lance lunged towards Roxanna on the throne, a hidden spell triggered. He recoiled sharply, then collapsed, coughing up blood. In his agony, he wondered whether this was blood catalyst magic, perhaps activated by Fontaine's blood, seeping into a concealed circle she prepared. Roxanna gazed down at him as he slumped. She asked calmly how he had failed to notice anything at all. Had he not himself taught her that trust and familial love were worthless? She reminded him that in the past, she always obeyed his every word without question. Lance cursed her weakly from the floor. Dion entered the room at that moment and ordered him to kill her immediately. Dion walked past his father without acknowledgement, approached the throne, knelt before Roxanna, and offered his hand in quiet allegiance. Lance stared in stunned disbelief. Another betrayal? The door flew open. Jeremy burst in, announcing his return and asking if she'd been waiting for him. He froze at the sight before him, then demanded to know what was happening. Lance turned his head towards Jeremy with a flicker of desperate hope and reached out weakly for help. Jeremy's gaze locked on Dion. He shouted at Dion to release Roxanna's hand at once. Both of her hands belonged to him alone. He rushed forward, knocked Dion's hand away, and dropped his head to Roxanna's lap, claiming his place. The three of them formed a striking picture. Roxanna enthroned, Dion standing protectively at her side, Jeremy resting possessively below. Roxanna addressed her father softly, observing how unfortunate it was for him. The Agree's household no longer stood with him. She assured him not to worry. He still had uses, so she would not kill him. For now, from the woods encircling the Agree's stronghold, Cassius and his men watched the distant unrest. Inside, the noise continued. One of his soldiers asked if it was time to strike. Cassius judged that Roxanna had already made her move. He instructed them to wait a little longer. In silence, he vowed to destroy the cruel fate that had once been destined for her. When the news reached Sierra, she was visibly shaken. How could it be true? Had Dion really committed treason and Lance imprisoned? She believed Dion was more likely to be following someone else's orders, and she had a good idea who that was. Roxanna. Sierra rose from her bed. She intended to go and see Roxanna. Beth, her maid, cautioned that the situation currently in the mansion was unstable. It would be better for them to wait until the dust settled. A sudden knock sounded at the door. Sierra moved towards it, but Beth anxiously urged her back and grabbed a stick for defense. When Sierra opened the door, she found Griselda standing there. Griselda observed that the mansion was in a complete frenzy. People scurried like ants, yet all their efforts would prove futile. She reflected that Roxanna was a remarkably interesting girl. Years earlier, when Roxanna was only 12, she had noticed Griselda's fascination with intriguing matters. She promised to one day deliver exactly what Griselda desired, if she joined her plan. The plan resembled a precisely wound clock. The slightest deviation would ruin it. Like layered glass, a single sheet shattered easily, but multiple layers grew nearly unbreakable. Did anyone truly realize that Roxanna had orchestrated everything from long ago? Griselda knew she was merely a pawn on Roxanna's chessboard. Yet, she hoped her father would not judge her too harshly. She was simply following what she'd been taught to survive. Among the Agreases, killing was not the only skill. Each possessed their own specialty. The useless were eliminated early. Familial love held no place in the household, despite all the education they received. They were trained to eliminate their own siblings, so such sentiments never took root. Griselda thought the most elegant event of all would unfold within these walls. Roxanna's voice cut through sweetly as she addressed the iron cage where Lant sat bound. She asked whether he agreed she had become a fitting heir to the household. He remained racked by coughs, offering no reply. She pressed why he stayed silent, and confessed how every glance at his face had filled her with disgust. She had long pondered the best way to kill him, slowly enough to shatter whatever pride and hope he clung to. She mused aloud that, as in a grease, his resistance to poison would let him endure far longer under her butterfly's attention. She urged him to last as long as possible. She wanted him to suffer enough to repay every debt he owed. Lance screamed as the poison butterflies descended and began their work. Outside the judgment room, several younger Agrease children froze when something heavy thudded at their feet. One asked in shock if it was a head. Jeremy strolled up casually and confirmed it was. He wanted to end the man for years. He was the same instructor who had overseen his brutal training since childhood. He felt the death had come too quickly, shaking blood from his hand. One sibling exclaimed in disbelief, warning that acting against the educators would bring severe punishment. Jeremy replied nonchalantly that the one responsible for such discipline was likely already locked in the punishment room, beaten to a pulp. He suggested they go visit their father in the judgment room and see what awaited. In the past, they had been unlucky. The educators, or rather, executioners, had always held their lives to their hands. He asked if any of them wanted to join in dealing with the remaining. With the mansion ringing with chaos, the remaining Agrease wives gathered in anxious confusion. They debated whether to hide the children somewhere safe or pledge loyalty to Dion, fearing they might share Lance's fate. Charlotte's mother quietly regretted never having befriended Maria. Perhaps an alliance might have protected them now. As Charlotte moved to leave, her mother protested, pleading for protection against Dion. Charlotte replied that Jeremy had summoned all the siblings. She added sharply that her mother should look after herself. No one had shielded them when they were the ones in danger. Addressing the other women, she declared that they were on their own now. If they wanted to survive, they should run. With that, she hurried away. Privately, she scoffed at the notion of aligning with Dion. Jeremy himself would never obey him. At last, she mused. Roxanna had seized control of the Agrease family. Across the mansion, the younger siblings whooped and raced through the halls, gleefully hunting down their educators. One boasted that it was child's play and asked how many the others had ended, claiming 5 already. Another laughed that counting kills meant they still had more to go. The clear leader was Jeremy. Jeremy stood amid a pile of bodies, spitting that they were too late. He had already finished them all. Griselda approached and informed him that Roxanna had an order. She handed him a small pouch and explained that Roxanna wanted him to set it alight in Maria's room. Jeremy hesitated. Maria would already be asleep. She was always an early riser. What exactly did Roxanna intend? Griselda shrugged that she did not know. She added that Roxanna also wanted the maids sent to the annex. Jeremy gave her a questioning look, but took the pouch. In her study, Roxanna turned from the window and settled at the table. As she lifted a glass of amber liquid to her lips, light spilled in from the corridor. The door had opened. She remarked coolly that she had not granted permission to enter. Dion padded silently to her side. She sighed that she was in a generous mood today and offered him a glass, swirling the liquid invitingly. He declined. She teased that it was a pity. He might not get another chance like this. He stared at her steadily. She fingered the lapel of the coat, draped over her shoulders, and observed that he must recognize it. Cassis had given it to her, and she'd worn it ever since. She quite liked it. She asked whether seeing her in the blue air's coat angered him, pulling the fabric tighter around herself. Dion's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. She continued that she found his expression amusing, how angry he looked whenever he saw her now. Reaching up, she brushed his cheek lightly with her fingers. Dion seized her wrist. He stated that he did not regret killing Achille. If given the chance to go back, he would do it again without hesitation, right before her eyes. Even the mere illusion had shaken her. His grip tightened as he wondered aloud how devastated she would be if she witnessed Achilles' real death, what she would do in that moment. Dion admitted that sometimes he regretted killing Achille, not out of remorse, but because he could no longer relive Roxanna's reaction to it. She thought silently that she already knew how exactly she would react, though she would never admit it aloud. He continued that regret was pointless. Achille was gone. Instead, he had once wanted to end her mother in front of her eyes. Roxanna knew that, which was why she asked Maria to protect Sierra. She silently acknowledged that everything he said was true. Tonight carried a weight it would never hold again. He recalled the night she had claimed to understand what he truly wanted. Roxanna reflected privately that perhaps that was why they were having this conversation now. He remarked how strange it was that she seemed to know things about him that he himself did not. Roxanna thought silently. Perhaps they shared more similarities than either would admit. She told him she had once believed her only purpose in surviving this hell was to avoid Achilles' fate. Survival had been everything, yet, looking back, she realized it had not been her true goal. She endured because she held a dream. Privately, she admitted the words sounded almost like a lie. She had never truly believed this moment would arrive. Both of them were only speaking this way, hiding their thorns. Because she now sat on their father's throne. Without Lance's downfall, such a conversation would have been impossible. She asked whether he knew what she wanted. Dion replied that he did. She smiled softly and confessed that, honestly, she was still not entirely sure herself. Dion asked if he fulfilled her dream. Could she give him what he wanted in return? Privately, they both understood that no one else in the world knew them as deeply as they knew each other. Roxanna said it was time for her to finish what she started. In the corridor, she encountered a servant hurrying past. She asked where he was going in such haste. The man froze. She pointed out calmly that he was heading in the wrong direction. The employees were not gathered that way. The servant stammered that he felt unwell and needed to leave. Sweat beaded on his forehead as she stepped closer. She whispered that he needn't worry, to close his eyes, and that everything would be fine when he woke. He collapsed, trembling and foaming at the mouth. Roxanna murmured that Lance had been foolish. She knew all his loyal servants were dead. Yet, even in desperation, he should have chosen someone with poison resistance. She had told him countless times that her entire body had become toxic, but he never listened. She retrieved a note from the servant. It was addressed to the Gold Vertium, a plea from Lance, requesting immediate assistance in exchange for a past favor. Just then, Jeremy called from behind, asking what she was doing here, and warning that she would catch a cold without her coat. He glanced at the twitching body on the floor, noting the clear signs of poisoning, then shrugged out of his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. He reported that he had locked away all the employees in the annex as instructed. Roxanna smiled and praised him. He wondered why she had given the order, but didn't truly care. He was content simply to follow her commands. She asked him to take the poisoned man to join the others. Jeremy agreed, lifted the body effortlessly, and told her he would see her later. Once he was gone, Roxanna wondered what favor Lant could have done for the Vertiums at the assembly. He had long suspected them because of Cassis, or perhaps he had never fully believed her explanation about the puppet. Either way, it appeared the Vertiums owed him a debt. She dismissed the thought, lit the letter with a candle, and watched it burn. As the ashes scattered, she reflected silently. It no longer mattered to her. In the dungeon, Fontaine shouted for a guard, but no response came. No footsteps, no groans of other prisoners. He tugged at the chain binding his remaining hand, grumbling about its durability. Secretly, though, he considered the restraint lenient. Had it been his decision, his limbs would have been nailed straight to the wall. He almost thanked them for the oversight. This was his window to escape. Footsteps echoed. Dion appeared in the cell. He asked where Lant was. In response, Fontaine sneered that Dion no longer even called him father. Lant was either dead or fleeing. Sensing an opening, Fontaine pleaded. Dion had used him to seize power. Surely all this was unnecessary. He swore he had never wanted to leave the family. Roxanna had manipulated him. He had always believed Dion should rule. Fontaine thought he had finally deciphered the cold mask Dion wore. He offered a deal. Release him, and he would deliver Lance's head personally. Kill him with his own hands, then vanish from the Agree's name forever. No interference, no threats. Dion repeated the phrase, "Get in my way," as though amused. Fontaine had never stopped him from taking what he wanted, and never would. Fontaine swallowed his fury and pressed. If he posed no threat, why keep him chained? Why not let him go? Dion said nothing. The silence unnerved Fontaine more than any threat. He admitted he was debating whether to kill him on the spot. He had never liked Fontaine anyway. Deliberately, he crushed an ant under his boot. Fontaine stammered that Dion could not be serious. Killing kin violated The words died as Dion gripped the iron bars and tore the cell door apart with his bare hands. He remarked calmly that he had always wanted to pluck out Fontaine's eyes. Fontaine's mind reeled. He had groveled, flattered, submitted. Yet, here he was, about to die for reasons he could not grasp. A shrill alarm suddenly blared through the compound. Fontaine sagged against the wall in relief. Whatever had triggered, it had just saved his life. Dion turned without another word and left. Guards scrambled to extinguish a fire in the Great Hall when shouts rang out. Intruders had breached the perimeter. Enemy attack. One guard recalled in panic that Fontaine had ordered most of the troops away earlier. Isidore, moving with Cassius's strike team, received a quiet reminder. They were not here to massacre the Agreses. Past the order, no pursuit of those fleeing. Cassius's goal remained to locate and neutralize Lance's remaining forces. Unarmed civilians and fleeing servants were not to be touched. That small mercy was the limit of what a Pedalian owed them. Inside the mansion, the younger siblings spiraled into panic. Their father's fall, the fire, now an armed incursion. None of them could piece together what was truly happening. The remaining guards faced worse. The monster hutch had been opened anonymously by Roxanna. Creatures roamed free, tearing into anyone they found. Screams and wet snarls filled the corridors. Chaos spread exactly as she had orchestrated. Cassius found a lone guard shaking uncontrollably. He asked the trembling man where Lant Agris could be found. At the annex, the gathered servants turned to Griselda in nervous confusion, asking why Lady Roxanna had ordered them confined here. Griselda raised a hand for silence. She warned that anyone who wished to live should stay perfectly still. Once her barrier broke, things would turn ugly very quickly. Jeremy was still hurrying towards the annex when distant shouts reached him. He snarled that he would teach the intruders a painful lesson, then froze. Above the Great Hall, the sky had turned an angry red, lit by flames devouring the building. Shock rooted him in place. He'd stood there with Roxanna only moments earlier. Had someone deliberately set the estate ablaze? Was Xana safe? She had to be. It was only fire. She was stronger than anyone he knew. He trusted her completely. Yet, an unfamiliar anxiety clawed at his chest. He broke into a run, cutting down any Pedalian soldier who blocked his path. They were obstacles. He needed to reach her. At the next landing, another squad barred his way. He muttered that he would love to play with them, but he was in a hurry. A sudden whoosh swept through the courtyard. Everyone looked up in panic at what appeared to be drifting red snow. It was not snow, but instead, Roxanna's poison butterflies. One soldier shouted a frantic warning not to move. A blinding yellow flash erupted next, and reality warped. When vision cleared, every weapon had vanished from the soldier's hands. Before them hovered an enormous red orb encased in a larger white sphere. A black void yawned open beneath one man. He plummeted through it with a scream. The rest stood paralyzed, trembling in raw terror. Jeremy recognized the technique immediately. Still, even he felt a chill at how seamlessly Roxanna's butterflies had woven a full hallucination chamber around them. In the mansion's hidden corridors, Lant moved stealthily beneath a stolen executor's robe and sword. He could not fathom how every one of his loyal enforcers had been slaughtered so cleanly, until he remembered Griselda was the only one capable of casting magic circles. How many of his children had turned against him? Ungrateful wretches. He thought he would rebuild from scratch and would lie low in the secret passages until his backup arrived. Then slaughter them all. He halted abruptly. A figure approached the narrow path. The newcomer paused and drew back the hood. Lance shed the cloak and raised his sword. He remarked coldly that he might have shown mercy if Dion had begged forgiveness. But the look on his son's face made it clear that was not his intention. He sneered that he had always known Dion was mad, but never imagined he was foolish enough to let a girl manipulate him into treason. Worthless idiot. Lant reminded him where those deadly skills had come from. He had forged him into the weapon he was today. He landed a vicious slash that opened a cut beside Dion's eye. He trusted Dion, he said bitterly. Yet, here they were, and Dion appeared to be enjoying every second of it. A sudden memory surfaced. Lant, at Dion's age, facing his own father with the same murderous intent. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Perhaps Dion truly did take after him. Fontaine had somehow freed himself from the chains. He could not fathom why fate had singled him out for this ruin. His hand gone, betrayed by the siblings who had schemed against their father from the start. Dion and Roxanna were the true traitors. He had done nothing to deserve this. Inwardly, he cursed them both and resolved that, once out of this place, he would gather new forces. First, he would eliminate Lant and Dion, then claim Roxanna, though her betrayal might ultimately demand her death as well. A sudden, searing pressure drove through his back and out his chest. He looked down to see the blade protruding from him. Before he could form the question of who or why, a voice remarked that he was clearly not Lant Agris. Fontaine sank to his knees in spreading red. The speaker explained he had tracked footprints from the underground dungeon, only to find the wrong man. Fontaine lifted his gaze and recognized Cassius Pedelian. Memory stirred. Years earlier, at the gathering of the 5 great families, a younger Cassius had presented himself beside Luzar Castro while the heirs were introduced. Fontaine and Dion had attended too. Fontaine bitterly noted how the Pedelians escaped the savage contest for succession that scarred his own lineage. The man standing over him now carried himself with a changed gravity. Yet, Fontaine was certain this was the same Pedelian heir. Confusion deepened. He believed Roxanna killed him. Fury surged. He longed to tear the man apart, but his body no longer answered. He managed to grasp that Land had escaped ahead of him. Cassius acknowledged the information. Fontaine added that Dion had passed through moments earlier in pursuit of their father. Following Dion would lead to Lant, and conveniently to Roxanna as well. Cassius observed that Fontaine had only just declared his intention to kill her. Fontaine nodded, privately thinking they now shared the same enemy, and the Pedelian should simply leave. Instead, Cassius drew his sword again, and stated that, under the circumstances, he might as well end him here. Shock froze Fontaine. He protested that he had done the Pedelian no harm whatsoever. His last coherent thought, as strength ebbed away, was scornful. A righteous Pedelian was nothing but an absurd fiction. Elsewhere, Sierra moved quickly along a corridor behind Beth and Emily, still reeling. When she opened the door to find Emily waiting, she had at once asked after Roxanna. Emily had assured her that Roxanna was safe and had sent her to guide Sierra out. The estate would soon vanish entirely, leaving no time for full explanations. Sierra had resisted, frantic for her daughter. Emily explained that Roxanna had already escaped. If Sierra followed now, the two would likely cross paths soon. With Beth quietly promising they could avoid the intruders, Sierra had finally agreed. A fleeting image of toddler Roxanna surfaced, quickly overshadowed by her daughter's earlier cutting words. Genuine care should not translate into actions that only burdened her further. She had no wish to regard her own mother as a liability. Beth abruptly caught the scent of burning. Emily pressed them to hurry, but more could be said. A tremendous explosion ripped through the structure, leveling walls and flooding the air with smoke. Emily ordered them to stay behind her, as visibility vanished into the haze. She herself had no clear idea what had occurred. Then, a figure, Dion, came hurtling through the smoke, directly towards Sierra. Oh man, this series is on hiatus, so there's nothing after this. Will Roxanna's mother survive? I'm 60-40 on probably not, so Roxanna can develop more as a character. But man, I love the art and the gruesomeness of this series. The premise is pretty enjoyable, but what do you guys think? Subscribe for more manhwa, but for now, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.